I've been a deputy in Kern County for 11 years now, and I still can't explain what happened that night in March. I'm writing this down because I need to, not because anyone asked me to. Maybe it'll help me sleep better. Maybe it won't. My therapist says writing things down can help process trauma, but I don't think she had this kind of trauma in mind when she said it. It was a Tuesday, around 1:30 in the morning. I was working the graveyard shift alone, which wasn't unusual for our station. Budget cuts had reduced our overnight staff to one deputy and a dispatcher who worked from home half the time. That night, it was just me. The dispatcher, Linda, had called in sick around midnight, said something about food poisoning. Protocol said I should have called for backup coverage from the neighboring county, but I didn't. I told myself it was just going to be a quiet night like most of them were. The station was old, built sometime in the 60s, all cinder block and fluorescent lights that buzzed when they felt like it. My desk was in the main room, facing 3 empty cells that we almost never used anymore. Most arrests got processed and transferred to the county facility within hours. Those cells just sat there, doors open, gathering dust and that specific smell that old buildings get. Like concrete and industrial cleaner and something underneath that you can't quite place. Something organic that had been there so long it had become part of the structure itself. I was doing paperwork, routine stuff, incident reports from the previous week that I'd been putting off. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner, making its 4th pot of the night. Outside, Kern County was dead silent. Our town, if you could call it that, had about 800 people spread across maybe 30 square miles of farmland and desert scrub. At night, especially midweek, you could fire a gun down Main Street and not hit anything but air. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Rebecca had taken the house in town, and I'd moved into a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. She'd said she couldn't handle the worry anymore. Couldn't handle lying awake every night wondering if I'd come home. I'd tried to tell her that nothing ever happened in Kern County, that the most dangerous thing I dealt with was occasionally breaking up bar fights at the Dusty Rose Saloon. But she'd made up her mind, and when Rebecca made up her mind about something, that was the end of it. So now I had an apartment that smelled like paint thinner and sawdust, a bed I couldn't sleep in, and night shifts that stretched out like an endless highway to nowhere. The loneliness was worse than I'd expected. After 16 years of marriage, coming home to an empty apartment felt like walking into a stranger's life. Around 2, I decided to do a patrol, not because I needed to, but because sitting in that station was making me feel strange. I'd been feeling off all week, actually. Like I was forgetting something important but couldn't remember what. That restless feeling you get when you're supposed to be somewhere else but you don't know where. It had started small, just a nagging sensation in the back of my mind, but over the past few days it had grown into something more insistent, more demanding. I grabbed my keys and my radio and headed out to the cruiser. The night air was cold, probably mid-40s, with that sharp quality it gets in the desert when the sun goes down. Clear sky, million stars, no moon. The kind of night that makes you feel small and insignificant, like you're just a temporary flicker in an infinite darkness. The cruiser smelled like old coffee and the pine air freshener that hung from the rearview mirror. I'd been meaning to replace that air freshener for months, but kept forgetting. It had faded from green to a sickly yellow color and barely gave off any scent anymore. Just hung there, spinning slowly whenever I hit a bump in the road. I started my patrol route heading north on County Road 14, a 2-lane strip of asphalt that cuts through agricultural land. Fields on both sides, mostly fallow this time of year. The headlights picked up the occasional tumbleweed rolling across the road, and once I saw the eyes of a coyote watching from the shoulder before it turned and disappeared into the darkness. The radio was quiet, except for occasional chatter from other counties. Someone in Wichita County was dealing with a domestic disturbance. Someone in Baylor County had a drunk driver refusing to take a breathalyzer. Normal stuff. The kind of routine chaos that filled up the overnight hours in rural Texas. I'd been driving this route for so long I could probably do it with my eyes closed. Every curve, every dip in the road, every landmark was burned into my memory. There was the old Hendricks place at mile marker 3, abandoned for 10 years now with windows boarded up and a for sale sign that had been there so long the paint had faded to nothing. There was the water tower at mile marker 5, covered in graffiti from generations of high school kids. There was the railroad crossing at mile marker 6 where Tommy Valdez had gotten his truck stuck and had to be pulled out by a tow truck at 3 in the morning. About 20 minutes into the patrol, my radio crackled. Static at first, then what sounded like someone trying to speak, but the signal was too weak. I adjusted the volume and tried to respond. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. You trying to reach me?" More static. Then, very faintly, I heard what sounded like my own call sign being repeated. Unit 7, Unit 7. But the voice was wrong, too distant, too hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well or from somewhere very far away. It had that quality that recordings sometimes have when they've been copied too many times, degraded and distorted until the humanity is almost gone. "Dispatch, I'm not copying you. Please repeat." The static cut out completely. Dead silence on the radio. Not even the background hiss you normally get, just nothing. I drove for another few miles, checking the radio every couple of minutes, but it stayed quiet. Probably just atmospheric interference or a glitch in the relay tower. Happened sometimes out here where the terrain was flat and signals could bounce in weird ways. Cell phone coverage was spotty at best, and radio signals could do strange things when conditions were right. But it bothered me. In 11 years of working this county, I'd never heard my own call sign repeated back to me like that. Never heard that particular quality in a voice, that hollowness that made it sound like it was coming from somewhere other than a normal radio transmission. That's when I saw the light. It was off to the east, maybe half a mile into the fields. A single point of light, steady and unmoving, about the height a person would hold a flashlight. I slowed down and pulled over to the shoulder, killing my headlights to get a better look. The light stayed where it was. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there in the middle of an empty field like someone was standing perfectly still, waiting for something. Or waiting for someone. I sat there for a full minute, watching the light, trying to figure out what it could be. It wasn't a farmhouse. The nearest structure was at least 2 miles away. It wasn't a vehicle. Too small, too stationary. It wasn't some kind of equipment or machinery. Nothing out here to power anything like that. I grabbed my spotlight and aimed it in that direction, but the beam didn't reach far enough. Just lit up the first 100 yards of dried earth and dead vegetation before fading into darkness. The other light was still visible beyond that, unchanged. If anything, it seemed brighter now, more insistent. I should have called it in, should have requested backup before investigating. But I was alone. Linda was supposedly sick, and calling the county sheriff for backup would mean explaining that I saw a light in a field and got spooked. They already thought I was struggling after my divorce. Sheriff Crawford had pulled me aside last week and asked if I was doing okay, if I needed to talk to someone. I'd told him I was fine, just adjusting to the change. Didn't need him thinking I was losing it over a light in a field. I turned my cruiser onto a dirt access road that led into the fields. The suspension rattled over the uneven ground, and dust kicked up in my headlights. As I drove closer to where I'd seen the light, I kept watching for it, but somehow I couldn't seem to get any nearer. It was like the light was moving away from me at exactly the same speed I was approaching, maintaining a constant distance. The access road was rough, full of potholes and washboard ruts that hadn't been graded in years. Probably not since Old Man Patterson had sold his land to some investment company from Dallas that had let everything go to hell. The fields on either side were overgrown with weeds and dead corn stalks from last season. In the headlights, they looked like an army of scarecrows standing at attention, watching me pass. After about 10 minutes of driving deeper into the fields, I stopped and got out. The light was gone, just vanished like it had never been there. I stood beside my cruiser with my flashlight scanning the darkness, but there was nothing. No light, no movement, no sound except the ticking of my engine as it cooled and the whisper of wind through the dry grass. The silence was profound. In the city, there's always some kind of background noise, traffic, people, machinery, something. But out here in the middle of these fields there was nothing. Just wind and darkness and the feeling that I was completely alone in a way that went beyond physical distance. That's when I noticed my radio was making noise again. Not static this time, but voices. Multiple voices overlapping, all of them speaking at once, too garbled to understand. It sounded like someone had taken dozens of radio transmissions and played them all simultaneously, creating a cacophony of indistinguishable sound. I reached through the window and grabbed the handset. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Are you trying to reach me?" The voices stopped instantly. Then, after a long pause, I heard Linda's voice, clear as day, no static at all. "Unit 7, what's your 20? I'm about 3 miles north on County Road 14, investigating a suspicious light. When did you come back on duty?" There was a pause. "Deputy, I've been on duty all night. You called in at the start of your shift like always." My mouth went dry. "Linda, you called in sick, around midnight, said you had food poisoning." Another pause, longer this time. "Deputy, I think you should come back to the station. Right now." Something in her voice made my skin crawl. It was Linda's voice, her inflection, her speech pattern. But there was something underneath it, something that didn't sound quite right. Like when you hear a recording of yourself and it sounds both familiar and foreign at the same time. The words were right, but the music was wrong. "Linda, did anyone else call in tonight? Any other units on patrol?" "Deputy Harrison, I need you to return to the station immediately. Do you copy?" "I copy, but I need you to answer my question. Is there anyone else on duty tonight?" The radio went silent again. Not static, not dead air, but a silence that felt intentional. Like someone on the other end was choosing not to respond. Like whatever was on the other end was deciding what to say next, weighing its options. I got back in my cruiser and started driving back toward the main road. My hands were shaking slightly on the wheel, and I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from something else. Something I didn't want to name. That feeling in my gut that told me something was very, very wrong. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror. The fields behind me were dark and empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something important back there. Or that something was following me, staying just outside the reach of my taillights. Every time I looked in the mirror, I expected to see headlights behind me, but there was nothing. Just darkness and the faint silhouette of dead corn stalks against the slightly lighter sky. When I reached County Road 14 and turned back toward town, I noticed something that made me hit the brakes. There were fresh tire tracks in the dirt where I'd pulled off the road earlier. My tracks, heading into the field. But there was also another set of tracks, wider and deeper, like a larger vehicle had followed me in. And these tracks didn't lead back out to the road. They just stopped, right there in the middle of the access road, like whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. I got out and examined the tracks more closely with my flashlight. They were definitely fresh, made within the last hour. The edges were still sharp, not yet eroded by wind. and they were strange. The tire tread pattern didn't match anything I recognized. It wasn't the standard pattern you see on commercial vehicles or even heavy trucks. It was something else, something I couldn't identify. The tracks led about 50 yards into the field and then just ended. Not like the vehicle had turned around, not like it had gotten stuck. Just ended, as if the vehicle had been lifted straight up into the air or had simply vanished. I stood there in the cold, staring at those impossible tracks, and felt the first real stirring of fear. Not the adrenaline-pumping fear you get during a dangerous situation, but something deeper and more primal. The kind of fear that comes from realizing the world doesn't work the way you thought it did. I made it back to the station around 3:15. The fluorescent lights were still buzzing, the coffee maker was still gurgling, and my unfinished paperwork was still spread across my desk, exactly where I'd left it. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Like a stage set dressed to look exactly how a small-town sheriff's station should look at 3 in the morning. The dispatch desk was empty. Linda wasn't there, but her coffee mug was sitting on the console, still steaming. The radio was on, crackling with the usual overnight traffic from neighboring counties, but our frequency was silent. I touched the coffee mug. It was hot, like it had just been poured. "Linda," I called out. "You here?" No response. I walked through the station, checking the break room, the bathroom, the records room. Empty. But Linda's jacket was hanging on the back of her chair, and her purse was sitting on the floor beside the desk. She was here. Or she had been very recently. The break room looked like someone had just left. There was a half-eaten sandwich on the table, a magazine open to an article about celebrity divorces, and the microwave was still running, counting down from 30 seconds. But there was no one there. I opened the microwave. Inside was a cup of soup, still cold, like it had just been put in. But the timer was running, counting down as if someone had started it and then walked away. 27 seconds, 26, 25. I let it run, watching the numbers count down, feeling like I was waiting for something to happen when it reached 0. Some revelation or explanation. The microwave beeped. The soup sat there cold and unchanged, and I was no closer to understanding what was happening. I sat down at my desk and tried to focus on the paperwork, but my mind kept going back to that light in the field, to the tire tracks that went nowhere, to Linda's voice on the radio telling me she'd been on duty all night when I knew she'd called in sick, to her coffee mug, still steaming, in an empty station. The fluorescent light above my desk started flickering. Just a little at first, barely noticeable, but then it got worse. Flicker, flicker, steady, flicker, flicker, steady. The pattern was almost rhythmic, like Morse code or some kind of signal. I looked up at it, and in that moment of distraction, I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. The kind someone makes when they're not in a hurry, when they have all the time in the world. I turned around. Linda was standing in the doorway to the records room, but something was wrong with her. She was wearing her uniform, had her dispatcher headset around her neck, looked exactly like herself. Same short blonde hair, same reading glasses on a chain, same wedding ring she always wore even though her husband had died 3 years ago. But she wasn't moving, just standing there perfectly still, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Linda, you okay?" She didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't breathe, as far as I could tell, just stood there like a mannequin, watching me with eyes that reflected the flickering fluorescent light in an odd way. Eyes that looked flat and lifeless, like a doll's eyes. I stood up slowly, my hand instinctively moving toward my service weapon. "Linda, you're starting to freak me out here." That's when she smiled. Not a normal smile, but something wider and more deliberate. Too wide. Her mouth opened further than it should have been able to, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. And she said, in that same voice I'd heard on the radio, "Deputy Harrison, you need to check cell 3. Cell 3, the last cell in the row, the one furthest from my desk. The one we hadn't used in at least 6 months. The one that had a reputation among the deputies. Nothing specific, just a feeling. Nobody liked going in there, nobody liked walking past it. There were jokes about it being haunted, about hearing things, but they were the kind of jokes people make when they're trying to make light of something that actually bothers them. Why do I need to check cell 3? Because someone's waiting for you." The fluorescent light above my desk went out completely. The only light now came from the hallway behind Linda and the dim emergency lighting near the exit. In that reduced visibility, I could see that Linda's shadow was wrong. It was too long, stretching across the floor toward me, and it didn't match her posture. She was standing upright, but her shadow looked like it was crouching, ready to spring. And it was moving independently, shifting and writhing like a living thing. "Linda, I need you to step into the light where I can see you properly." She didn't move. That smile stayed fixed on her face, and her eyes never blinked. "Cell 3, Deputy. Someone's been waiting for you all night. They've been very patient." I drew my weapon, not pointing it at her, just holding it at low ready, because everything in my training was screaming that this situation was wrong. 11 years as a deputy, 16 years before that in the Army, and every instinct I'd developed was telling me to run. But I couldn't run. This was my station, my territory, my responsibility. "Linda, I'm going to ask you one more time. Step into the light." The figure in the doorway didn't move, but the shadow did. It stretched further across the floor, elongating impossibly, reaching toward my desk like a living thing. The edges of it seemed to pulse and writhe, and where it touched the floor, the linoleum seemed to darken as if the shadow was burning through it or staining it permanently. I took a step back and my foot kicked something on the floor. I looked down. It was Linda's dispatcher headset, the one she'd been wearing around her neck a moment ago. But it was old, corroded, like it had been sitting in a damp basement for years. The foam padding was rotted away, and the plastic was cracked and discolored. The wires were green with oxidation, and there was something growing on it. Some kind of mold or fungus that shouldn't have been able to grow on plastic and metal. When I looked back up, the figure in the doorway was gone, just an empty hallway, and that wrong shadow retreating back toward the records room. It moved like oil, sliding across water, unnatural and fluid, defying the laws of physics that said shadows were supposed to stay attached to their sources. I should have run, should have called for backup, gotten in my cruiser, and driven straight to the county sheriff's office. Should have broken every protocol and procedure and gotten the hell out of that station. But I didn't. Because I could hear something coming from cell 3. A sound like breathing, slow and steady, echoing in the concrete space. And underneath the breathing, I could hear something else. Humming. Someone was humming a tune I almost recognized. Something old. Something that tickled the back of my memory but wouldn't come into focus. I moved down the hallway toward the cells, my weapon raised, flashlight in my other hand. Cells 1 and 2 were empty, doors standing open like always. But cell 3's door was closed. I couldn't remember the last time we'd closed one of those doors. Couldn't remember ever seeing that particular door closed in all my years at the station. The breathing sound got louder as I approached. Not labored, not distressed, just steady and rhythmic, like someone sleeping deeply, and that humming continued, weaving in and out of the breathing, creating a strange harmony. I reached for the door handle, and the moment my fingers touched the cold metal, the breathing stopped. Complete silence. The humming continued for a moment longer, then faded away like someone turning down a volume knob. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, the creak of my leather duty belt as I shifted my weight. I pulled the door open and shined my flashlight inside. The cell was empty. Nothing but a metal bench bolted to the wall and a toilet in the corner. No person, no sign that anyone had been there. But on the bench, arranged in a neat line, were 6 dispatcher headsets, all of them old and corroded, all of them identical to the one I'd kicked on the floor by my desk. Each one was slightly different in its decay. Some had more rust, some had more of that strange fungus growing on them. Some were cracked or broken in different ways, like they represented different stages of deterioration, different periods of time. And scratched into the concrete wall above the bench, in letters that looked like they'd been carved with a fingernail or a piece of metal, was a message. "We've been waiting for you to notice." The letters were deep, carved with significant force. Whoever had made them had spent time on them, had wanted them to be permanent. And the concrete around them was stained darker, like the act of carving had left something behind, some residue or substance that had seeped into the material. Below the message, smaller and harder to read, were other marks. Names, maybe, or dates. I couldn't quite make them out in the beam of my flashlight. They seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, refusing to come into focus. I backed out of cell 3 and stood in the hallway trying to process what I was seeing. 6 headsets, 6. How long had they been there? Why hadn't I noticed them before? I walked past that cell multiple times every shift, looked into it when I did my security checks. How could 6 corroded headsets have been sitting there without me seeing them? But I knew the answer. I hadn't noticed them because they hadn't been there before. Just like the tire tracks in the field that went nowhere. Just like Linda's voice on the radio when she was supposed to be homesick. Things were appearing and disappearing, and the boundaries between what was real and what wasn't were starting to blur. The world I thought I understood was revealing itself to be something else entirely. I pulled out my phone to take pictures of the headsets and the message on the wall, but when I looked at the screen, I saw that I had 47 missed calls, all from the same number, all from the station's landline. The phone that was sitting on Linda's desk not 20 feet away from where I'd been sitting all night, but I'd been at the station all night. The phone hadn't rung once. I would have heard it. That phone had a bell loud enough to wake the dead, a mechanical ringer from before everything went electronic. There was no way I could have missed even one call, let alone 47. I scrolled through the call log. The calls had come in at regular intervals, every 12 minutes, starting at 10:47 p.m. and continuing until just a few minutes ago. I checked the time. 3:33 a.m. I did the math. 47 calls over roughly 5 hours meant one call every 12 minutes, like clockwork. Precise, intentional. Not random pocket dials or wrong numbers. Someone or something had called the station 47 times at exact 12-minute intervals while I sat there in silence. The number 12 bothered me. There was something about it. 12 minutes, 12 inches in a foot, 12 hours and half a day, 12 months in a year, 12 disciples, 12 jurors. Some kind of significant number that appeared throughout human culture and history. But I couldn't figure out why it mattered. I went back to the dispatch desk. The phone was an old landline, the kind with a physical ringer that was loud enough to wake the dead. There was no way I could have missed 47 calls on that phone. The sound of it ringing was one of those things that got into your bones, that you couldn't ignore even if you wanted to. I picked up the receiver and listened. Dial tone, normal as could be. The familiar hum of an active line. I pressed the button to check voicemail, and the automated voice told me I had 47 new messages. My hand was shaking as I pressed one to listen to the first message. Static. Then breathing. Then my own voice, distant and hollow, saying, "Unit 7, what's your 20?" The same phrase Linda had said to me on the radio earlier. But this time it was my voice saying it, asking myself where I was. And there was something wrong with the voice. It was me, but it wasn't me. Like someone had taken a recording of my voice and played it back after processing it through some kind of filter. It had my inflection, my accent, my speech patterns, but it was missing something essential, something that made it human. I skipped to the next message. Same thing. Static, breathing, then my voice. "Unit 7, what's your 20?" I started skipping through the messages randomly. Message 7. "Unit 7, what's your 20?" Message 15. "Unit 7, what's your 20?" Message 32. "Unit 7, what's your 20?" Every message was identical. 47 recordings of me asking myself where I was, each one time-stamped 12 minutes apart. 47 times over the course of the night, while I sat at my desk 20 feet away, while I drove through empty fields chasing lights that vanished, while I stood in dark cells looking at corroded headsets that shouldn't exist. I hung up the phone and sat down at the dispatch desk, trying to think clearly. This was beyond unusual. This was impossible. But it was happening, and I needed to figure out what it meant. There had to be some logic to it, some pattern I could understand. That's when I noticed the logbook. Every dispatcher kept a handwritten log of calls and radio traffic, even though everything was recorded digitally now. It was an old habit, a backup system from before computers. Linda's logbook was open on the desk, and the last entry was from 11:47 p.m. 1078 officer needs assistance. County Road 14, mile marker 7. Unit 7 responding. But I hadn't responded to any calls at mile marker 7. I'd been investigating the light in the field, nowhere near mile marker 7. And the timestamp was wrong too. At 11:47, I'd been sitting right here at this desk, doing paperwork. I remembered clearly because I'd looked at the clock and thought about how slowly the night was going. I flipped back through the previous pages of the logbook, looking for anything unusual, and that's when I saw it. The same entry, repeated over and over again, going back weeks, going back months. 1078 officer needs assistance. County Road 14, mile marker 7. Unit 7 responding. Same timestamp. 11:47 p.m. Different dates, but always the same entry. Tuesday, March 5th. Tuesday, February 26th. Tuesday, February 19th. Every Tuesday night for as far back as the logbook went, which was about 6 months. And at the bottom of each page, in handwriting I didn't recognize, someone had written, "Unit 7 did not return." My heart was hammering now. I grabbed the logbook and started counting more carefully. 36 entries over the past 6 months. 36 nights where, according to the logbook, I had responded to a call at mile marker 7 and never returned. But I was here. I was sitting in the station looking at these entries, very much alive and very much returned. So, what did it mean? Had I been responding to these calls and forgetting about them? Was I having some kind of breakdown, losing time, doing things I couldn't remember? I tried to think back over the past 6 months. Could I remember every Tuesday night? Could I account for every shift? The nights blurred together, one indistinguishable from another. Patrol routes, paperwork, coffee, silence. What if I had been going to mile marker 7 and something had been happening there? What if I was losing time, losing memories, losing pieces of myself? I heard the front door of the station open. Footsteps in the lobby, slow and deliberate. Someone was coming in, walking with purpose. The kind of walk someone has when they know exactly where they're going and what they're going to do when they get there. "Hello," I called out, my hand moving to my weapon. "Station's closed to the public. You need to come back during business hours." The footsteps continued, getting closer. I could see a shadow moving across the frosted glass of the lobby door. A human-shaped shadow, normal and proportional, not like the thing I'd seen earlier. But that didn't make me feel any better. The door opened, and Linda walked in. The real Linda, not the figure I'd seen before. She looked tired, worried, and when she saw me sitting at her desk with the logbook open in front of me, relief flooded her face. "Thank God," she said. "I've been trying to reach you all night." "Linda, what are you doing here? I thought you were sick." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Sick? Deputy, I've been at home trying to call the station for the past 5 hours. Nobody's been answering. I finally gave up and drove in to check on you. I was worried something had happened." I held up the phone. "I've got 47 missed calls from the station's number. From here, from this phone." She shook her head, confused. "That's not possible. I was calling from my cell phone. And before you ask, yes, I called your cell too. Went straight to voicemail every time. I must have left a dozen messages." I checked my phone again. The call log showed 47 missed calls from the station's landline. But when I scrolled further, I saw what Linda was talking about. 53 missed calls from her cell phone, all marked as unable to connect. Not declined, not sent to voicemail. Unable to connect, like my phone had been in a dead zone or turned off, even though it had been in my pocket the entire time with full bars of service. "Linda, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you ever seen this logbook entry before?" I turned the logbook around and showed her the repeated entries about mile marker 7. Her face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks, and her hand went to her mouth. She sat down heavily in her chair and stared at the logbook for a long moment before speaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Deputy Harrison, I think you need to know something. You're not the first officer to work this shift." Linda pulled out a drawer in the dispatch desk and removed a file folder I'd never seen before. It was old, the manila paper yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. It was labeled simply, "Night Shift Incidents, 19/7, present." The label was typed on an old-fashioned label maker, the kind with the plastic tape that embossed the letters. The kind nobody had used in decades. "What is this?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "This is everything the department doesn't want to talk about," she said quietly. "Every unexplained disappearance, every officer who reported strange occurrences on the night shift, every incident that got written off as stress or fatigue or equipment malfunction, everything that didn't make sense, everything that couldn't be explained." She opened the folder and spread out the contents on the desk. Incident reports, photographs, transcripts of radio calls. And at the center of it all, a map of Kern County with 6 red X's marked on it. One of them was at mile marker 7 on County Road 14. The others were scattered across the northern part of the county, but they formed a pattern, a rough circle, with mile marker 7 at its center. 6 officers over 36 years, Linda continued. All of them working the night shift, all of them alone. The first one was in 1987. Deputy named Marcus Webb. He was 24 years old, fresh out of the academy. Married, wife pregnant with their first child. He radioed in that he was investigating a suspicious light near mile marker 7, never returned. They found his cruiser 3 days later, parked on the shoulder with the engine still running and the driver's door open. No sign of Marcus, no evidence of foul play, just gone. I looked at the photograph of Marcus Webb. Young guy, couldn't have been more than 25. Smiling in his department photo, full of confidence and optimism. Dark hair, strong jaw, bright eyes. He looked like he believed he could make a difference, like he believed the world made sense. The next page showed a photo of his abandoned cruiser, and my blood ran cold. It looked exactly like mine. Same make, same model, even the same placement of equipment. Like someone had taken a photo of my car and aged it 36 years. The second disappearance was in '93, Linda went on. Deputy Sarah Mitchell, 31 years old, 8 years on the force. Same story. Investigating a light in a field, radioed in her position, never heard from again. They found her cruiser 6 days later in almost the exact same spot where they'd found Marcus Webb's. Engine running, door open, no sign of Sarah. After that, the department tried to stop assigning solo night shifts, but budget cuts and staffing issues meant someone always ended up working alone eventually. She pulled out more photographs. More officers, more abandoned cruisers. All of them found at or near mile marker 7, all of them with engines running and doors open, all of them empty of their occupants. Deputy Michael Ramirez, 1999. Disappeared after responding to a call about a stranded motorist near mile marker 7. Deputy Jennifer Kowalski, 2006. Last radio contact mentioned seeing unusual lights in the fields. Deputy Robert DeMarco, 2012. Cruiser found with his coffee still warm in the cup holder. Deputy Kevin Torres, 2018. His cruiser was discovered with all the lights on, radio still transmitting static, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment and was coming right back. The last one before you was Deputy Kevin Torres in 2018. He lasted 3 months on the night shift before he disappeared. But here's what makes your case different, Deputy Harrison. You're still here. You've been working this shift for 6 months and you're still here. That's never happened before. I thought about all those logbook entries, all those nights where, according to the records, I'd responded to mile marker 7 and never returned. Linda, have I been disappearing? Have there been nights where I haven't come back? She hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the truth. Saw the fear and uncertainty she'd been carrying. There have been nights where I couldn't reach you. Nights where your radio went silent and stayed silent for hours. But then you'd call in the next morning like nothing happened, and when I'd ask you about it, you'd have no memory of being out of contact. You'd look at me like I was crazy, like it hadn't happened at all. The pieces were starting to fit together in a horrible way. How many nights? 36 times in the past 6 months. Always on Tuesday nights. Always around the same time. You'd go off the air around 11:47, and then you'd come back around 4:15, and you'd never remember being gone. Sometimes you'd file reports about investigating suspicious lights or checking on abandoned vehicles, but the details were always vague, inconsistent, like you were filling in gaps in your memory with what you thought must have happened. Tuesday nights. Today was Tuesday. Tonight was the 37th time. The pattern was complete, or maybe just continuing. I was part of something that had been happening for 36 years, something that took officers one by one and left nothing behind but abandoned cruisers and unanswered questions. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Why didn't anyone warn me? Because everyone who tried to warn previous officers either quit or disappeared themselves. There's something about this shift, about mile marker 7, that doesn't want to be investigated. It protects itself. It removes anyone who gets too close to understanding what it is. Sheriff Crawford knows. The county commissioners know. But they keep it quiet because they don't have a choice. What are they supposed to do? Close down an entire section of highway? Admit that officers disappear and they don't know why? I looked at the map again, at those 6 red X's. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, a rough circle with mile marker 7 at the center. And inside that circle, written in faded pencil, someone had drawn strange symbols that I didn't recognize. They looked almost like letters, but not from any alphabet I knew. Curved and angular at the same time, interconnected in ways that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. What are these symbols? I don't know. They were in the original file from 1987. Some investigator drew them after interviewing witnesses who lived near the disappearance sites. Multiple people reported seeing those symbols scratched into trees, carved into fence posts, painted on abandoned buildings, always within this circle, always near where the officers disappeared. I traced the circle with my finger. It encompassed maybe 50 square miles of northern Kern County. Agricultural land mostly, a few small ranches, some abandoned properties. Nothing that seemed particularly significant or unusual. Just empty Texas countryside, the same as thousands of other square miles in the state. Has anyone tried to investigate the area? Really investigate it, I mean. Not just respond to calls, but actually search for whatever's out there? Linda nodded, 3 times. First in 1987, right after Marcus Webb disappeared. They brought in search and rescue teams, cadaver dogs, even some federal agents. Spent 2 weeks combing the area. Found nothing. Second time was in 2006 after Jennifer Kowalski. Same result. Third time was in 2019 after Kevin Torres. By then, they knew something was systematically wrong, but they still couldn't find anything. No bodies, no evidence, no explanation. Just empty fields and abandoned buildings and the feeling that something was watching them the whole time. What kind of feeling? The investigators reported feeling like they were being observed, like something was aware of them and tracking their movements. Some of them said they heard voices when there was no one around, saw lights that vanished when they approached, found tire tracks that led nowhere. The same things you experienced tonight. After the third investigation, Sheriff Crawford made the decision to stop trying. Said it was too dangerous, that we were losing too many resources for no results. Now, we just try to manage it. Try to keep officers safe and hope that whatever it is stays satisfied with taking one every few years. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark streets of our small town. Everything looked normal, quiet, safe. But I knew now that it was all an illusion. Something was out there. Something that had been taking officers for decades, and I'd been dancing with it for 6 months without even knowing it. 6 months of missing time, of lost memories, of slowly being pulled into whatever nightmare existed at mile marker 7. Linda, what happens now? I don't know, but I think tonight is different. I think whatever's been taking officers is finally ready to finish what it started with you. That's why I could suddenly reach you again. That's why you're becoming aware of what's been happening. It wants you to know. It wants you to understand before it takes you completely. As she said that, every light in the station went out. Complete darkness. Not even the emergency lighting stayed on. And in that darkness, I heard them. Voices. Multiple voices, overlapping and echoing, all of them saying the same thing. Unit 7, report to mile marker 7. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam illuminated the lobby and I saw them. Figures standing in the darkness. 6 of them. Each one wearing a Kern County Sheriff's Department uniform. Each one with a name tag. Webb, Mitchell, Ramirez, Kowalski, DeMarco, Torres. The 6 officers who had disappeared over the past 36 years. They were all here, standing in my station, staring at me with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like animals in the dark. But they weren't animals. They were something else. something that wore the shapes of people but wasn't people anymore. Deputy Webb, the first one to disappear, stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away, from the bottom of a well or from inside a tunnel. "Your shift isn't over, Deputy Harrison. You still have one call to respond to." "I'm not going to mile marker 7, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You don't have a choice," Deputy Mitchell said. Her voice was the same as Webb's, distant, hollow, echoing. "None of us did." Deputy Ramirez spoke next. "We all fought it. We all tried to resist. But in the end, we all went. And so will you." "What are you?" I asked. "What happened to you?" Deputy Kowalski tilted her head, and the movement was wrong. Too fluid, too mechanical. "We're what comes next. We're what waits at the end of the shift. We're the price of keeping watch in the dark." The lights came back on, and the figures were gone. Just me and Linda in an empty station. But on the dispatch console, the radio was crackling to life. And through the static, I could hear my own voice calling for help. "Officer needs assistance. Mile marker 7. Officer needs assistance. Officer needs assistance." The voice was mine, but it was coming from the radio, coming from somewhere out there in the dark, somewhere near mile marker 7. A future version of me, or a past version, or some version that existed in a space between those two states, calling for help that would never come. Linda grabbed my arm. "Don't go. Please. Whatever's out there, you can't fight it. 6 officers tried, and 6 officers disappeared." But I was already moving toward the door, because I finally understood. Those 6 officers hadn't disappeared. They'd been trapped, caught in some kind of loop, responding to the same call over and over again for decades. And I'd been joining them piece by piece, night by night for the past 6 months. 36 times I'd lost pieces of myself. 36 times I'd gone to mile marker 7 and come back less than I was before. "I'm not going to fight it," I told Linda. "I'm going to end it." I got in my cruiser and drove north on County Road 14. As I approached mile marker 7, I could see that light again. The same light I'd been chasing all night. But this time I understood what it was. It was a beacon, a trap, something that drew in officers and kept them forever, adding them to its collection, feeding off their routines and their dedication to duty, taking the part of them that served and protected and twisting it into something else, something that kept them trapped in an eternal shift that never ended. I pulled over at mile marker 7 and got out. The light was about 100 yards into the field, steady and unmoving. And standing around it, I could see figures. 7 figures now. The 6 officers plus 1 more. A figure that looked like me, or would look like me if I stepped into that circle. A perfect copy, waiting to replace me. Waiting to finish the process that had been happening over 6 months. "Deputy Harrison," the figure said in my voice, "your shift is over. Time to join us. Time to take your place in the pattern." I drew my weapon, not pointing it at the figures but at the light itself. No, my shift is over when I say it's over. And I fired 6 shots, emptying my magazine into that light. The bullets seemed to hang in the air for a moment, frozen in time and space, and then the light shattered like glass. The sound was deafening, a shriek of breaking reality that echoed across the empty fields. It was the sound of something old and powerful being wounded, something that had existed for longer than anyone knew. The figures screamed. All of them, including the one that looked like me, they scattered, dissolving into shadow and nothingness, their forms breaking apart like smoke in wind. And in the sudden darkness that followed, I heard something else. Sirens, real sirens coming from town. Linda had called for backup. Every available unit was heading this way, drawn by my gunshots and by Linda's frantic radio calls. And as they arrived, as their lights flooded the field and their voices called out to me, I realized what I'd done. I'd broken the cycle. I'd refused to join the pattern. And in doing so, I'd freed something that had been trapped for 36 years. Over the next few weeks, there were strange reports from across Kern County. People seeing officers in old uniforms walking the highways at night. Cruisers from decades past pulling into gas stations with no drivers behind the wheel. Radio calls from voices that shouldn't exist anymore. Voices that had been silent for years or decades. The 6 officers were free, but they weren't gone. They were still out there, still working their shifts, still protecting the county in whatever way spirits can protect anything. Still serving, still watching, still keeping guard in the darkness. As for me, I put in for a transfer, got assigned to day shift in a different county entirely. Started over, new station, new coworkers, new routines. I never worked another night shift in Kern County, and I never went near mile marker 7 again. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I turn on my old radio and scan through the frequencies. And sometimes, very faintly, I can hear them. Unit voices calling in their positions, checking on suspicious lights, responding to calls that will never end. They're still out there, still serving, still trapped between one shift and the next. And sometimes I swear I can hear them calling my name, inviting me back to join them in the eternal patrol, whispering through the static that my shift isn't really over, that I left something unfinished at mile marker 7, that there's still work to be done in the darkness. But I never answer. I close my eyes and try to sleep and tell myself it's just static, just interference, just my imagination playing tricks in the quiet hours before dawn. Some shifts, once you clock out, you should never clock back in. Because the thing about the night shift is this: it never really ends. It's still out there, still happening, still taking officers one by one. Maybe slower now, maybe more careful, but it's patient. It's been there for 36 years. It'll be there for 36 more. And somewhere in Kern County, on some dark Tuesday night, another deputy will see a light in a field. Will respond to a call at mile marker 7. Will step into that circle and become part of the pattern. Because that's what the night shift does. It takes the best parts of people, the parts that serve and protect, and it keeps them forever. Preserves them like insects in amber, like flowers pressed between pages, like photographs that never fade. I broke free, but the pattern remains. And it's always looking for the next Unit 7. Always waiting for the next officer who will notice too much, who will investigate too deeply, who will finally understand what it means to serve forever in the darkness. I just hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they run when they see that light instead of investigating. I hope they ignore the calls from mile marker 7, but I know they won't, because that's what makes someone a good officer. The inability to ignore a call for help, even when every instinct screams that something is wrong. The compulsion to investigate, to serve, to protect, and that's exactly what it feeds on. Forever and ever, amen. My name is Deputy Jake Morrison, and I need to tell you about what happened in Sawyer County, Montana during the winter of 2021. I've kept this to myself for 3 years now, but the silence is worse than the truth. At least, I hope it is. I'd been working for the Sawyer County Sheriff's Department for 9 years when they assigned me to permanent night shift. It wasn't a punishment exactly, more like a necessity. We were a small department serving a county that covered nearly 2,000 square miles of Montana wilderness, ranch land, and exactly 3 towns that barely qualified for the name. During winter, when the temperature dropped to 20 below and the roads iced over, most people stayed home. Most crimes stopped. Most emergencies could wait until morning. But someone still had to be out there. Someone still had to answer the radio when it crackled to life. Someone still had to patrol the empty highways and check on the handful of isolated ranches scattered across the frozen landscape. That someone was me. The shift started at 10 p.m. and ran until 6 a.m. 8 hours of darkness, silence, and cold so profound it felt like the world had stopped breathing. My patrol route took me through all 3 towns: Sawyer Falls, population 847, Red Creek, population 512, and Millbrook, population 298, and then out into the vast nothing between them. County roads that stretched for miles without a single light. Ranch access roads that disappeared into the dark. Highway 287, the main north-south corridor, where you could drive for an hour and see maybe 2 or 3 other vehicles. My dispatcher was a woman named Rachel Owens. She worked from the main station in Sawyer Falls, a small brick building that served as sheriff's office, jail, and administrative center all in one. Rachel had been dispatching for the county for 15 years, longer than anyone else in the department. She knew every road, every ranch, every family in the county. She had a calm voice, professional but warm. The kind of voice that could talk you through any situation without ever sounding panicked. I'd worked with Rachel for all 9 of my years with the department, but I'd never actually met her in person. She worked day shift when I worked days, and when I moved to nights, she'd already moved to nights years before. Our schedules aligned perfectly in terms of shift coverage, but we'd never been in the station at the same time, never crossed paths during shift changes, never attended the same department meetings or training sessions. It seemed strange when I thought about it, but not strange enough to worry about. Sawyer County was like that. People could work together for years and never actually meet face to face. The distances were too great, the population too spread out, the department too small to have regular gatherings. So I knew Rachel only as a voice on the radio, a presence that accompanied me through every shift, checking in periodically, dispatching calls, making conversation during the long, quiet hours. She told me about her cats, about the books she was reading, about the garden she was planning for spring. I told her about my failed marriage, about my daughter who lived with her mother in Seattle, about the cabin I was renovating on the north edge of the county. We were partners, in a way, connected by radio waves and mutual isolation, keeping each other company through the endless Montana nights. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday in February. The temperature had dropped to 15 below, and a storm system was moving in from the west. The sky was clear when I started my shift, but I could see the wall of clouds approaching, backlit by the setting sun. We were going to get snow, probably a lot of it, and the wind was already picking up. I checked in with Rachel at 10:07 p.m., same as always. Unit 4 to dispatch, starting patrol. Copy that, Unit 4. Quiet night so far. Storm's supposed to hit around midnight, so watch for black ice on the bridges. 10-4, anything I should know about? Negative, just you and me in the cold. I started my usual route, heading north out of Sawyer Falls on Highway 287. The heater in my cruiser was running full blast, but the cold still seeped in through the windows and doors. That kind of cold that makes your bones ache, that makes you wonder why anyone ever thought Montana was a good place to live. About 30 minutes into the patrol, Rachel's voice came over the radio again. Unit 4, I'm getting a report of a possible stranded motorist on County Road 15, about 8 miles east of Red Creek. Caller says they saw taillights pulled off on the shoulder about an hour ago. Hasn't seen them move. County Road 15 was one of the more remote routes in my patrol area. It ran east-west through ranch country, connecting a handful of properties to the main highway. In winter, it was rarely traveled. Most of the ranchers who lived out that way had four-wheel drive trucks and knew better than to go out in weather like this. Copy that, dispatch. Who called it in? There was a pause, a longer pause than usual. Then Rachel's voice came back. and it sounded slightly different. Still professional, still calm, but with something underneath it, something I couldn't quite identify. Caller didn't leave a name, called from a payphone at the Red Creek gas station. That was odd. The Red Creek gas station had closed down 3 years ago. The building was still there, but the pumps were removed and the phone booth had been vandalized so many times they'd finally taken it out. There was no payphone at the Red Creek gas station. Hadn't been for years. "Rachel, you sure about that location? Red Creek Station's been closed since 2018. Another pause. That's what the caller said. I've got it logged here. Call came in at 10:24 from the payphone at Red Creek gas station. I felt a prickle of unease. Rachel knew every detail about this county. She'd lived here her entire life, worked dispatch for 15 years. There was no way she'd forgotten that the gas station was closed, that the payphone was gone. "Okay, I'm en route to County Road 15. ETA about 20 minutes. Copy that, Unit 4. Be careful out there." I turned onto the access road that led to County Road 15, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The wind was stronger now, blowing loose snow across the road in ghostly streamers. The temperature display on my dash showed -18 and dropping. As I drove, I kept thinking about that payphone, about Rachel's voice, the way it had sounded just slightly off, like a recording played back at the wrong speed, or a conversation heard through a bad connection. County Road 15 was worse than I expected. The snow hadn't been plowed in days, and the surface was rutted ice. I slowed to a crawl, my spotlight sweeping the shoulders, looking for those taillights the mysterious caller had reported. After about 6 miles, I found them. A vehicle pulled off on the right shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly. As I got closer, I could see it was an older model sedan, probably from the early 2000s. Light blue or silver, hard to tell in the dark. Montana plates, but too covered in snow and dirt to read the numbers. I called it in. "Dispatch, Unit 4. I'm 1097 at County Road 15, mile marker 6. Got a silver sedan pulled over. Hazards on, no sign of occupants visible." "Copy that, Unit 4. Proceed with caution." I pulled up behind the sedan and left my engine running, my overhead lights painting the scene in alternating blue and red. I grabbed my flashlight and got out, immediately hit by wind so cold it felt like needles on my exposed skin. The sedan was empty. I could see that much before I even reached it. The windows were frosted over, but I could make out the empty seats through the clear patches. I tried the driver's door. Unlocked, I pulled it open and shined my flashlight inside. The interior was clean. No personal belongings, no trash, no indication of who had been driving. The keys were in the ignition, turned to the off position. The gas gauge showed a quarter tank. No obvious mechanical problems. No flat tires. Nothing that would explain why someone had pulled over here and then apparently vanished. I checked the glove compartment. Registration and insurance card, both made out to someone named Elizabeth Marsh, with an address in Billings. The registration was current, dated just 2 months ago. "Dispatch, vehicle is registered to Elizabeth Marsh, Billings address. No sign of the driver. Vehicle appears operable, no obvious issues. Any reports of missing persons matching that name?" The radio crackled with static. Then Rachel's voice, but it sounded wrong again. Distorted, like she was speaking from very far away. "Negative on missing persons, Unit 4, but I'm showing that vehicle was reported abandoned in the same location 6 months ago." The cold I felt had nothing to do with the temperature now. "Say again, dispatch?" "Vehicle registration shows a previous incident report. Same vehicle, same location, 6 months ago. September 15th. Vehicle was found abandoned, driver never located." I looked at the registration card again. It was dated December 2020, 2 months ago. There was no way this vehicle had been abandoned here 6 months ago, and then re-registered 2 months ago, and then abandoned here again in the exact same spot. Rachel, that doesn't make sense. The registration is current. This vehicle's been on the road recently. I'm just telling you what's in the system, Unit 4. I walked around the vehicle, my flashlight beam cutting through the blowing snow. That's when I noticed the tracks, or rather, the lack of tracks. The sedan was sitting in snow that had been undisturbed for days, maybe weeks. There were no tire tracks leading to it, no footprints around it. It was like the vehicle had been dropped from the sky and placed perfectly on the shoulder. Dispatch, I'm not seeing any tracks here, no indication of how this vehicle got to this location. The radio crackled, static, wind noise, and underneath it, something else. Something that might have been breathing. Unit 4, please repeat, you're breaking up. I said there are no tracks. The snow around the vehicle is undisturbed. It's like it's been here for weeks, but the registration says, Unit 4, I'm losing your signal. Please return to main highway for better reception. But my radio was working fine. Full bars, clear signal. I could hear Rachel perfectly, even with that strange distortion in her voice. Dispatch, my signal is strong. Can you copy? Unit 4, if you can hear me, return to main highway. The radio went silent. Not static, not dead air, just silence. Like someone had muted the other end. I stood there beside the abandoned sedan in the freezing wind, on a road that saw maybe 3 vehicles a week, and felt the first real stirring of fear. Something was wrong. Not just wrong with the vehicle or the situation, but wrong with everything. Wrong with Rachel's voice, wrong with the information she was giving me, wrong with the way the world was behaving. I got back in my cruiser and started driving back toward the main highway. The snow was falling harder now, the storm front moving in. Visibility was dropping fast. I kept trying to raise Rachel on the radio, but got nothing. Just that heavy silence that felt like something was listening. When I reached Highway 287, I tried again. Dispatch, Unit 4, do you copy? Immediately, Rachel's voice came back, clear as a bell. No distortion, no distance, just her normal, calm, professional tone. Copy, Unit 4, I was starting to worry. You went off the air for about 15 minutes. Rachel, I was trying to reach you the whole time. What happened? I don't know. Radio just went dead on my end. Equipment's been acting up all week. Probably the cold affecting the relay towers. You okay? Yeah, listen. That vehicle on County Road 15. You sure about that previous report? About it being abandoned in the same spot 6 months ago? There was a pause. What vehicle are you talking about? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The silver sedan, the one you dispatched me to. Registration to Elizabeth Marsh. Unit 4, I didn't dispatch you to any vehicle. You said you were heading north on 287, and then you went off the air. I pulled over to the shoulder and put the cruiser in park. My heart was hammering. Rachel, you sent me to County Road 15 to check on a stranded motorist. Report came in from a payphone at the Red Creek gas station. Jake, she never called me by my first name on the radio. Always Unit 4, always professional. Jake, I haven't dispatched any calls tonight. It's been completely quiet, and there's no payphone at the Red Creek station. You know that. I sat there, engine running, heater blasting, snow swirling in my headlights, and tried to understand what was happening. Had I imagined the entire call? Had I driven to County Road 15 on my own for some reason and then constructed a false memory of being dispatched there? I need you to check something for me, I said. Pull up the incident reports from September. See if there's anything about an abandoned vehicle on County Road 15. I could hear her typing. September 15th, she said after a moment. Deputy Collins responded to a report of an abandoned vehicle on County Road 15, mile marker 6. Silver sedan, registered to... Oh, to Elizabeth Marsh? Yes. How did you know? Because I just found the same vehicle in the same location. The radio went silent for a long moment. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was very quiet. Jake, that vehicle was towed 6 months ago. It's in the impound lot in Billings. It can't be on County Road 15. Then what did I just find? I don't know. I spent the rest of the night patrolling my usual routes, but I couldn't stop thinking about that sedan. About the impossible situation of finding a vehicle that shouldn't exist, in a location it had already been found 6 months earlier. About Rachel's voice on the radio, the way it had sounded distorted and wrong, and then her complete denial that she'd ever dispatched me to that location. The storm hit hard around midnight, just like Rachel had predicted. Snow came down in thick sheets, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet. The wind howled across the open plains, creating whiteout conditions that made driving treacherous. I stayed on the main highways, checking on the few businesses that stayed open late, making sure the handful of people still out in this weather made it home safely. Rachel's voice on the radio was normal for the rest of the shift. She dispatched me to a minor fender bender on Highway 287 around 2 a.m., both drivers unharmed but shaken. At 4 a.m., she sent me to check on a ranch house where the power had gone out and an elderly couple needed assistance getting their generator started. Normal calls, normal procedures, normal conversations. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, that I'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't go back. When my shift ended at 6 a.m., I drove back to the station to file my reports. The sun was just starting to rise, turning the snow-covered landscape pale pink and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that looked clean and new and innocent. I parked in my usual spot and walked into the station. Dispatch was on the second floor, up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. I'd never been up there during my night shifts. Never had a reason to. But I needed to see Rachel. Needed to look her in the eye and confirm that she was real, that our conversation had been real, that I wasn't losing my mind. The dispatch room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet with one large desk covered in radio equipment, computers, and stacks of paperwork. 3 monitors showed feeds from the handful of traffic cameras scattered around the county. A coffee maker gurgled in the corner, and the whole room smelled like old coffee and electronic equipment. But the room was empty. I stood in the doorway, looking at the empty chair, the silent radio equipment, the coffee maker with its full pot of coffee that no one had poured. According to the schedule board on the wall, Rachel Owens should have been here. Her shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., same as mine. She should have been sitting at that desk right now, finishing up her paperwork, getting ready to hand off to the day shift dispatcher. Sheriff Tom Bradley was coming up the stairs behind me. He was in his early 60s, built like a bull, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Morrison, what are you doing up here?" "Looking for Rachel. I need to talk to her about something that happened last night." Bradley frowned. "Rachel called in sick about an hour ago, said she had the flu, wouldn't be in for a few days. You need to file your report with the day shift dispatch." "She called in an hour ago?" "Yeah, why?" "Because I was talking to her on the radio an hour ago. She was working her shift." Bradley's frown deepened. "That's not possible. I took her call myself. She sounded rough, said she'd been sick all night. Couldn't have been working." I felt that prickle of unease again, stronger this time. "Sheriff, I talked to Rachel all night. She dispatched me to 2 calls, checked in with me regularly. It was definitely her voice. "Then you were talking to day shift. Maybe Carrie came in early." "No, sir. I checked my log. All my communications were on the night shift frequency, and the voice was definitely Rachel's." Bradley looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide if I was messing with him or if something genuinely strange was happening. "Come with me," he said. We went downstairs to his office, and he pulled up the radio logs on his computer. Every transmission was recorded and time-stamped, standard procedure for law enforcement. He scrolled through the night's entries, looking for my communications. "Here," he said, pointing at the screen. 10:07 p.m. You check in to start your shift, and then nothing. No dispatched calls, no check-ins. Your next transmission is at 6:02 a.m. when you radioed that you were 10:08 end of shift." I looked at the screen, feeling my stomach drop. That's not possible. I made multiple radio calls last night. I reported the abandoned vehicle on County Road 15, the fender bender on 287, the generator call at the Morrison Ranch. The Morrison Ranch. Bradley's expression changed. "Jake, there is no Morrison Ranch. Not in this county." "Yes, there is. You sent me there around 4 a.m. Elderly couple, power out, needed help with their generator." Bradley shook his head slowly. "There's a Morrison Ranch in Cascade County, about 200 miles from here, but not in Sawyer County, and I didn't send you there. According to these logs, you didn't receive any dispatched calls last night." I sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. This was impossible. I had clear memories of every call, every conversation. I could remember the faces of the people at the fender bender, could remember the smell of diesel fuel from the generator, could remember Rachel's voice guiding me through the shift. "Sheriff, I'm not making this up. Something happened last night, something strange." "I believe you," Bradley said, and the fact that he said it so calmly was somehow more disturbing than if he'd accused me of lying. "This isn't the first time." "What do you mean?" He closed the door to his office and sat down behind his desk. "Jake, how much do you know about Rachel Owens?" "Just what she's told me over the radio. She's been dispatching for 15 years, lives in town, has some cats." "Why? When did you last see her? In person, I mean." I thought about it. I don't think I ever have. We've always worked the same shifts, but different times. We've never been in the station together. "No one has," Bradley said quietly. "No one in this department has ever seen Rachel Owens in person. Not in the last 5 years anyway." The room felt suddenly colder. "What are you talking about?" "Rachel Owens was one of our dispatchers. That part's true. She worked here for 10 years, 2005 to 2015. She was good at her job. Great, actually. Knew the county better than anyone. Had a calm voice that could talk anyone through anything. She worked night shift mostly, preferred it. Said she liked the quiet." "Was?" I said, focusing on his use of the past tense. "In January 2015, Rachel was dispatched to work a day shift because we were short-staffed. It was a Wednesday, middle of winter, a lot like today. She was driving to work from her house on the north end of town when her car hit a patch of black ice on Bridge Street. Went through the guardrail and into Sawyer Creek. The water was frozen, but the ice broke. Her car went through. I felt something cold spreading through my chest. She died? They found her car 3 days later. She was still inside, still belted into the driver's seat. Medical examiner said she'd probably died on impact, didn't suffer. We had a funeral, closed down the station for a day. Whole town turned out. Rachel was well liked. But if she died in 2015, then who's been working dispatch for the last 6 years? Bradley looked at me with tired eyes. That's what we can't figure out. About a month after Rachel died, the night shift deputies started reporting radio contact with her. Said she was dispatching calls, checking in, having normal conversations. At first, we thought they were playing some kind of sick joke, but then we pulled the radio logs. There was nothing. No transmissions, no recorded conversations, nothing. But 3 different deputies, all of them solid and reliable. All of them reported talking to Rachel. What did you do? What could we do? We couldn't prove anything was happening. The deputies insisted they were having real conversations, but we had no evidence. Eventually, we just accepted it, stopped fighting it. If the night shift deputies wanted to believe they were talking to Rachel's ghost, or memory, or whatever, fine, as long as they did their jobs and stayed safe. And no one thought to mention this to me when I took over night shift? Would you have believed us if we had? He had a point. If someone had told me I'd be talking to a dead dispatcher, I would have laughed it off or requested a different shift. There's something else, Bradley continued. Every deputy who's worked night shift and reported contact with Rachel, they've all experienced other things. Strange calls that don't appear in the logs. Dispatches to locations that don't exist. Situations that seem real at the time but can't be verified afterward. Like an abandoned vehicle that was towed 6 months ago. Exactly like that. Deputy Collins, the one who responded to that original call about Elizabeth Marsh's sedan, he reported the same thing you did. Found the vehicle, called it in. Rachel told him it had been there before. Then, when he tried to verify it later, there was no record of his transmission. The vehicle existed, the incident report existed, but his conversation with Rachel didn't. So, what is she? A ghost? A recording? What? I don't know, but I think she's trying to warn us about something. All those strange calls, all those impossible situations, they all seem to be pointing toward something, some pattern we're not seeing. I thought about the sedan on County Road 15, about the lack of tire tracks, the undisturbed snow, about the payphone at the gas station that didn't exist anymore. Sheriff, I need to ask you something. What happened to the other deputies? The ones who reported contact with Rachel? Bradley was quiet for a moment. Deputy Collins transferred to day shift after 6 months. Said he couldn't handle the isolation anymore. Deputy Martinez requested a transfer to a different county. Deputy Wilson, he paused. Deputy Wilson disappeared. Disappeared? 3 years ago. Almost to the day. He was working night shift, same route you work now. Last radio contact was at 2:47 a.m. He called in that he was investigating a suspicious vehicle on County Road 15. Never heard from him again. Found his cruiser 3 days later, parked on the shoulder right around mile marker 6. Empty. No sign of Wilson, no evidence of what happened to him. The same location where I'd found Elizabeth Marsh's sedan. The same location where Collins had found it 6 months before my encounter. Mile marker 6, on County Road 15. Why didn't anyone tell me this before? Because we needed someone on night shift, and you were the only one willing to take it. And because we hoped maybe it was over. That whatever happened to Wilson was an isolated incident. That Rachel would leave the new night deputy alone. But she hasn't. No, Bradley said, she hasn't. I should have transferred right then. Should have walked out of Bradley's office and put in for day shift or a different county or early retirement. But I didn't. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was just stubbornness. Or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't quite name. A feeling that I was part of something now, something that had been building for years. And I couldn't walk away until I understood what it was. I spent the next few days researching. I pulled every incident report from the last 10 years looking for patterns. I searched through old newspapers, talked to retired deputies, visited the county library and went through their local history archives. What I found was disturbing, County Road 15 had a history. A bad history. Going back 50 years, there had been at least a dozen disappearances along that stretch of road. Not all of them at mile marker 6, but all of them within a 2-mile radius. Motorists whose vehicles were found abandoned. Hitchhikers who were seen getting into cars and never seen again. A rancher who went out to check his fences and never came back. The disappearances didn't follow any obvious pattern. They happened in different seasons, different years, to different types of people. But they all shared one thing. They all happened at night. And going back through the Sheriff's Department records, I found something else. Every single disappearance had been dispatched by a night shift dispatcher. In the 1970s and 80s, before Rachel's time, it had been a man named Thomas Green. In the 90s and early 2000s, it had been a woman named Patricia Moore. Then Rachel from 2005 to 2015. And now, apparently, Rachel's ghost, or echo, or whatever she was. I tracked down Thomas Green. He was in his 80s, living in a nursing home in Billings. When I showed up and explained who I was, his face went pale. I wondered when someone would finally come asking, he said. We sat in the common room of the nursing home, surrounded by elderly residents watching television and playing cards. Thomas had the look of someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret for a long time. Tell me about County Road 15, I said. What do you want to know? Everything. Why do people disappear there? What's happening? Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, Did you ever hear about the old Indian Trail? What Indian Trail? County Road 15 follows the path of an old Indian trail. Blackfeet, I think, though some say Crow. It was a sacred path or maybe a cursed one, depending on who you asked. The local tribes wouldn't travel it at night. Said there were spirits there or something worse. When the settlers came and started building roads, they paved right over that trail. Didn't think about the stories. Didn't care about the warnings. Just built their road and started using it. And people started disappearing. Not right away, first few years were fine. But then in 1958, a traveling salesman vanished. His car was found on the side of the road, engine running, door open, but no sign of him. Sheriff back then figured he'd gotten lost in the dark, maybe fell in a ravine or something. But they searched for weeks and never found a body. And it kept happening. Every few years, someone else would disappear. Always at night, always on that road. The Sheriff's Department kept it quiet. Didn't want to scare people or hurt tourism. But those of us who worked there, we knew. We knew that road was wrong. What about the dispatchers? Why are they involved? Thomas's hands trembled slightly. Because we heard them. They disappeared. They'd call in on the radio late at night asking for help, and we'd dispatch deputies to find them. But the deputies would find empty vehicles, or sometimes nothing at all. And the calls kept coming. Same voices, same locations, over and over, like a recording stuck on repeat. Did you hear them after you died? He looked at me sharply. How did you know? Because Rachel Owens, our night dispatcher, died in 2015. But she's still on the radio, still dispatching calls. Thomas nodded slowly. It happened to Patricia Moore, too. She was the dispatcher before Rachel. Worked nights for almost 20 years. In 2004, she had a heart attack right there at the dispatch desk. Dead before the paramedics arrived. But after she died, the night deputies still reported hearing her voice on the radio. She'd dispatch them to calls, give them directions, have conversations. For about a year, and then she stopped, went silent. That's when Rachel took over. Patricia stopped after a year? Almost exactly a year, to the day. I felt cold, despite the overheated nursing home. How long has it been since Rachel died? You said 2015? January. Yes. Then she's been on the radio for almost 6 years. 6 years. Much longer than Patricia Moore. Why? What was different about Rachel? Thomas, what happened to you after you stopped working as a dispatcher? He looked away, and I could see fear in his old eyes. I heard them for a while, the voices. Even after I retired, even after I moved away from Sawyer County. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear dispatch calls coming from radios that weren't there. Heard people calling for help from places that didn't exist. It went on for maybe 2 years, and then one night it just stopped. Went completely silent, and I never heard them again. Why did it stop? I don't know. Maybe because I stopped listening, stopped paying attention, stopped being part of the pattern. What pattern? The road wants something. I don't know what, exactly, but it takes people, and it uses us to help. The dispatchers, the deputies, we're part of its mechanism. It sends out calls, and we respond, and somehow that feeds it, keeps it going. How do we stop it? Thomas looked at me with pity. Son, people have been trying to stop it for 70 years. The only way to stop it is to stop responding. Stop going out there. Let that road sit empty and unused until whatever's there starves. But we can't do that. We're law enforcement. When someone calls for help, we have to respond. Even when the calls aren't real? Even when you know you're being lured into a trap? I didn't have an answer for that. When I left the nursing home, the sun was setting. The drive back to Sawyer County took 3 hours, and by the time I arrived, it was full dark. I was scheduled for my shift that night, but I sat in my car in the station parking lot trying to decide what to do. I could call in sick, could request a transfer, could walk away from this entire situation and let someone else deal with it. But I kept thinking about Deputy Wilson, about how he disappeared 3 years ago, responding to a call on County Road 15, about how they'd found his cruiser but never found him. I thought about Elizabeth Marsh, whose sedan kept appearing and disappearing at mile marker 6, about the traveling salesman from 1958 and all the others who'd vanished along that road. They were still out there. Maybe not alive, maybe not even as ghosts or memories, but as calls for help that never stopped. As distress signals that echoed through time, drawing in anyone who listened. And Rachel was still dispatching, still guiding deputies toward that road. Why? Was she trying to warn us? Or was she part of the trap? I went into the station and up to the dispatch room. It was empty again, but the equipment was on. The radio crackled softly with occasional traffic from other counties. The monitors glowed in the dim light. The coffee maker was full, the coffee still hot. I sat down at Rachel's desk and looked at her logbooks. She'd kept meticulous records during her 10 years of service. Every call, every dispatch, every incident carefully noted in her neat handwriting. The logbooks from before her death ended on January 14, 2015, the day she died. But there were more logbooks. Newer ones, dated after her death. The handwriting was the same, the notations were the same. As if Rachel had never stopped working, had never stopped keeping records. I opened the most recent logbook. The entries went back 6 months. I flipped through the pages looking for anything unusual, and there, on a page dated September 15th, I found it. 10:47 p.m. Call received, abandoned vehicle, County Road 15, mile marker 6. Deputy Collins dispatched. 11:15 p.m. Deputy Collins reports vehicle found, registration to Elizabeth Marsh, no sign of driver. 11:32 p.m. Deputy Collins reports finding second vehicle at same location. 11:47 p.m. Lost contact with Deputy Collins. But I knew from the official reports that Collins had only found one vehicle. Had only called in once. had never lost contact with the dispatch. I kept reading. There were more entries like that. Calls that had been made, responses that had been recorded, incidents that had never been officially logged. As if Rachel was keeping a separate record, a true record of what was really happening on those night shifts. I turned to the most recent entry. Last night. The night I'd worked. 10:24 p.m. Call received, stranded motorist, County Road 15, Deputy Morrison dispatched. 10:47 p.m. Deputy Morrison reports vehicle found, registration to Elizabeth Marsh. 11:03 p.m. Deputy Morrison reports anomalies at scene. 11:18 p.m. Lost contact with Deputy Morrison. 11:32 p.m. Contact restored. Deputy Morrison has no memory of dispatch. Pattern continues. Pattern continues. What pattern? I flipped back through the logbooks, looking at all the entries about County Road 15. And slowly, over the course of an hour, I started to see it. The incidents at mile marker 6 happened in cycles. Every 6 months, there was a spike in activity, and each cycle, the incidents got worse. More frequent, more intense, more dangerous. The last major spike had been in September, 6 months ago, when Collins had found the sedan, which meant the next spike was happening now. This month, this week, and according to Rachel's hidden logs, every spike had ended with a disappearance. Someone going out to County Road 15 and never coming back. In September 2018, it had been Deputy Wilson. Before that, in March 2015, it had been a truck driver named Michael Ross. Before that, in September 2012, it had been a local rancher named Dennis Kemp. The pattern went back decades. Every 6 months, the road took someone. And I was next. I should have left right then. Should have walked out of that station and never looked back. But I couldn't. Because if I left, someone else would take over night shift. Someone else would be sitting in this cruiser when Rachel's voice came over the radio. Someone else would drive out to County Road 15 and disappear into whatever waited there. At least I knew what I was walking into. At least I had a chance to prepare. I started my shift at 10 p.m., same as always. The night was clear and cold, temperature around 10 below. The stars were brilliant overhead, that particular clarity you only get in winter when the air is frozen and clean. I checked in with Rachel. Unit 4 to dispatch, starting patrol. Copy that, Unit 4. Quiet night so far. Her voice was normal, warm, professional, calm. No distortion, no distance. Just Rachel, the way she'd always sounded. Rachel, I need to ask you something. There was a pause. Go ahead, Unit 4. Are you aware of what's happening? Do you know about County Road 15? About the pattern? Another pause, longer this time. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you've been trying to warn us. All those strange dispatches, all those impossible situations. You've been leaving clues. Unit 4, are you feeling all right? I'm feeling fine. I'm feeling like I finally understand what's been happening. And I think you need to tell me the truth. What's on County Road 15? What's at mile marker 6? The radio went silent. Not static, not dead air. Just silence. I could imagine Rachel sitting at her desk, trying to decide how to respond. Or maybe not Rachel at all, but whatever was using her voice, whatever was keeping her trapped in that dispatch room even after death. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Quieter, sadder, more real. Jake, you need to turn around. Go home. Don't work tonight. I can't do that. Yes, you can. Clock out. Go home. Live your life, please. What happened to you, Rachel? What happened the day you died? I don't remember. I remember driving to work, and then nothing. And then I was here at the dispatch desk, and it was night, and the radio was calling for help. And I've been here ever since. For 6 years. Has it been that long? It feels like a few weeks. Like I just started my shift and it never ended. You died, Rachel. You went through the ice on Bridge Street, January 14th, 2015. I know, part of me knows, but the rest of me is still working, still dispatching, still sending deputies out to help people who call for assistance. Except they're not people. The calls aren't real. Some of them are. Some of them were real once. They're echoes, maybe, or memories. People who disappeared on County Road 15, still calling for help even though it's too late. And something out there uses those calls to draw more people in. Why? What does it want? I don't know, but it's hungry, and it uses me to feed. Every time I dispatch a deputy to County Road 15, every time someone responds to those calls, it gets stronger, and I can't stop. I try to warn you, try to make the dispatches strange enough that you'll question them, but I can't just refuse to send help. It's not in my nature. It's not who I am. What happens if someone doesn't respond? What happens if we just ignore the calls? I don't know. No one's ever tried. I thought about that. About all the deputies over the years, all of them responding to Rachel's dispatches. All of them driving out to County Road 15, because that's what you do when dispatch sends you. You go. You help, you serve, and protect. Rachel, where's Deputy Wilson? Her voice became even quieter. He's still there, at mile marker 6. They're all still there. Everyone who's ever disappeared on that road. They're trapped, just like I'm trapped. Caught in a loop that never ends. Can they be freed? I don't know. Maybe if someone broke the pattern. Maybe if someone refused to participate in the cycle. How? By not responding when I dispatch you. By not going when I call. But even as she said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. Because if I didn't respond, someone else eventually would. The pattern would continue with a different deputy, a different victim, unless I ended it completely. Rachel, I need you to dispatch me to County Road 15, mile marker 6, right now. Jake, no, don't do this. I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to end this. But I need you to send me there officially. On the record, I need this dispatch to be logged. They'll just erase it like they erased all the others. Not if I make sure they can't. Trust me, Rachel. One more dispatch, then you can be free. She was quiet for a long time, then, Unit 4, I'm getting a report of a stranded motorist on County Road 15, mile marker 6. Can you respond? 10-4 dispatch, en route. I drove north on Highway 287, then turned onto the access road that led to County Road 15, the same route I'd driven before. The same road I'd traveled dozens of times during my shifts. But this time felt different. This time felt final. As I approached mile marker 6, I could see it waiting for me. The silver sedan, exactly where it had been before. Hazard lights blinking in the darkness. Empty and abandoned and impossible. But this time, I kept driving. I didn't stop. I didn't investigate. I drove right past the sedan and kept going. Unit 4 to dispatch. I'm passing the reported location. No vehicle visible. Unit 4, please confirm. The caller was very specific about the location. I'm confirming. There's nothing here. I could hear the confusion in Rachel's voice. This wasn't following the pattern. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I kept driving, watching my odometer. Mile marker 7. Mile marker 8. And still I drove, heading deeper into the empty countryside. Unit 4, please return to mile marker 6 and conduct a thorough search. Negative, dispatch. Proceeding to investigate other possible locations. The radio crackled with static. I could hear something else underneath it now. Something that wasn't Rachel, something that sounded like dozens of voices whispering at once, all of them saying the same thing. Come back. Come back. Come back. I kept driving. At mile marker 10, I stopped the cruiser and got out. The night was absolutely silent except for the wind. No traffic, no animals, no sound at all except the rustle of frozen grass. I walked back along the road, back toward mile marker 6. I didn't take my cruiser, didn't take my radio, just walked, step by step, breaking the pattern in the most fundamental way possible. When I reached mile marker 6, the sedan was still there, but now I could see others. More vehicles scattered in the darkness, pulled off on the shoulder or sitting in the fields. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All of them with their hazard lights blinking, all of them empty, all of them waiting. And standing around them were the people, the disappeared. I recognized Deputy Wilson from his photograph, recognized Elizabeth Marsh from her driver's license photo, recognized faces from missing persons reports and old newspaper articles. They stood there, transparent as mist, watching me approach. "You're not supposed to be here," Deputy Wilson said. His voice sounded like Rachel's had, distant and hollow. "Not like this. You're supposed to be in your cruiser, supposed to respond to the dispatch, supposed to join us." "I'm not joining anything," I said. "I'm ending this. You can't. The road won't let you. The road doesn't have a choice. I'm not playing by its rules anymore." I kept walking, passing through the transparent figures. They didn't try to stop me, just watched with sad, empty eyes. At the exact center of mile marker 6, right where the sedan was parked, I found what I was looking for. A patch of ground that felt different, colder, wrong, like a wound in the world. I knelt down and touched it. The earth was frozen solid, but I could feel something underneath, something that pulsed with a slow, hungry rhythm. "What is this?" I asked. "It's the place where the road is thin," Elizabeth Marsh said. "Where our world touches something else. The old tribes knew about it, avoided it. But then you built your road right over it, and now it's trapped. Can't close, can't heal, just stays open, hungry, feeding on anyone who gets too close. How do we close it? You can't. It's been open for too long. Too many have fed it. It's too strong now. There has to be a way." Deputy Wilson knelt beside me. "There might be, but it requires a sacrifice. Someone has to go into the wound willingly, not taken, not lured, chosen. And they have to seal it from the inside. What happens to them? They become part of the seal, part of the barrier between worlds. Forever." I looked at him, at all of them, at the souls trapped here, unable to move on, caught in an eternal loop of calling for help that never came. "What happens to you if I do this? If I seal the wound?" "We go free," Rachel's voice said. I turned and saw her standing there, transparent like the others, but more solid, more real. We finally get to rest. And the road, the disappearances. They stop. The wound closes and the road becomes just a road again. I stood up and looked at my cruiser, still visible in the distance. At the normal world, the world where I had a job and a daughter and a life. Then I looked at the wound in the world, at the dozens of trapped souls, at Rachel's sad smile. "There's no other way." "There's always another way," she said. "You could walk away. Let this continue. Let it take someone else in 6 months, and 6 months after that, forever. That's not really a choice." "No," she agreed. "It's not." I took a deep breath of frozen air. "Okay, how do I do this?" "You just have to be willing. The road will do the rest." I knelt down and pressed both hands against the frozen ground. "I'm willing." The earth opened beneath me. not gradually, not slowly, just opened, and I fell through into darkness. I expected cold, expected pain, expected horror, but it was peaceful, quiet, like floating in deep water. I could feel the wound closing above me, could feel the barrier forming, could sense the trapped souls being released, flowing past me and away, finally free. And I could hear Rachel's voice, clear and warm, one last time. "Thank you, Jake. Rest now. Your shift is over." The darkness took me, and I didn't fight it. They found my cruiser 3 days later, parked at mile marker 10 on County Road 15. Empty. No sign of me. No evidence of what had happened. Sheriff Bradley organized searches, brought in dogs, helicopters, volunteers. Searched for weeks, found nothing. Eventually, they had to give up, had to declare me missing, presumed dead, had to move on. But the disappearances stopped. No more strange calls from County Road 15. No more abandoned vehicles at mile marker 6. The road became just a road again, quiet and empty and safe. And late at night, when the new night shift deputy patrols that route, sometimes they see something. A figure standing on the shoulder, visible for just a moment in the headlights. A man who looks like he's directing traffic, making sure everyone stays safe. They never stop. Never investigate. Just drive past and continue their patrol. Because some sacrifices are meant to last forever, and some shifts never truly end. My name is Sheriff Tom Dalton, and I've been wearing a badge in West Texas for 26 years. I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at a man. Domestic violence calls that ended in blood. Methamphetamine labs that blew up with families inside. Drunk drivers who turned children into statistics on dark highways. I thought I understood the nature of evil, the limits of human cruelty, the boundaries of what was possible in this world. I was wrong about all of it. It started on a Thursday night in October 2019. I was working the late shift, which wasn't unusual. As sheriff of Randall County, I often took the overnight hours myself. Partly because I believed in leading by example, partly because my deputies had families to go home to, and partly because my own home had become a place I didn't particularly want to be. My wife, Sarah, and I had been going through what the marriage counselor called a difficult period. I called it the slow death of everything we'd built together over 32 years. The signs had been there for a while, I suppose. The way she'd stopped asking about my day, the way I'd stopped telling her. The separate bedrooms we'd adopted under the guise of my irregular schedule disrupting her sleep. The polite distance we maintained, like roommates who'd learned to coexist without really connecting. Our daughter Emily, away at college in Austin, had noticed during her last visit home. She'd pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay between Mom and me. I'd lied and said we were fine, just busy. She'd looked at me with eyes that said she knew better but wasn't going to push. The thing about marriage, I'd learned, is that it doesn't die all at once. It erodes slowly, like a riverbank wearing away grain by grain, until one day you look across the water and realize the landscape has completely changed. Sarah and I had been eroding for years, maybe since Emily left for college, maybe even before that. We'd stopped being partners and had become cohabitants, sharing space but not lives, going through the motions of a marriage that existed more in memory than in reality. I could trace it back to specific moments if I tried. The night 5 years ago, when I'd missed our anniversary dinner because of a hostage situation that turned out to be a drunk man with a BB gun. The Christmas, when I'd been called away from opening presents because someone had driven their truck into a ditch and needed extraction. the countless birthdays and holidays and ordinary evenings when the job had taken precedence over everything else, when duty had trumped love, when the badge had mattered more than the woman who wore my ring. Sarah had been patient, had understood, or tried to understand, that being married to a sheriff meant being married to the job. But patience has limits, and understanding can only stretch so far before it breaks. We'd reached that breaking point, and neither of us knew how to step back from it. So I worked nights. Drove the empty highways of West Texas and told myself I was being noble, being dedicated, being a good sheriff. The truth was simpler and sadder. I was hiding. Randall County sits in the Panhandle, where Texas stretches up toward Oklahoma like an afterthought. It's flat country, agricultural land broken up by the occasional ranch or small town. The main artery through the county is Interstate 27, running north-south from Lubbock to Amarillo. During the day, it's busy with trucks hauling goods, families traveling, salesmen making their routes. At night, especially late at night, it's nearly empty. Just the occasional 18-wheeler and the even more occasional passenger vehicle. The landscape out here has a particular quality at night. During the day, you can see for miles in every direction, nothing but flat earth and sky meeting at a distant horizon. But at night, your headlights create a bubble of light that moves with you, and everything beyond that bubble is absolute darkness. It's easy to feel like you're the only person left in the world, like civilization has ended and you're just driving through the aftermath, searching for something that's already gone. I'd grown up in this county, born and raised in Amarillo, spent my whole life in the Panhandle, except for a brief stint in the Army right after high school. I knew these roads the way some people know their own homes, knew which curves were dangerous in the rain, which bridges collected ice in winter, which stretches had the worst visibility when the dust storms came rolling in from the west. I'd driven these highways as a teenager, sneaking out to meet girls or drink beer with friends. I'd driven them as a young deputy, learning the county inch by inch. And now I drove them as sheriff, responsible for every mile, every citizen, every emergency that arose in this vast, empty space. My father had been a deputy in this county, back in the 70s and 80s. He'd taught me to drive on these same roads, had shown me how to read the landscape, how to anticipate problems before they developed. He'd died of a heart attack when I was 25, still in uniform, still serving. The funeral had been massive. Every law enforcement officer in a 100-mile radius had attended. Sarah had been pregnant with Emily then, just starting to show. I remembered standing by the grave, watching them lower my father's casket, thinking about how he'd spent his entire life in service to this county and wondering if I'd end up the same way. Now, 26 years later, I knew the answer. Of course I would. It was in my blood, in my bones. This job wasn't something you did, it was something you were. My patrol route that night took me north on I-27 from the county line up to the junction with Highway 60, then back south again. Round trip was about 60 miles, took roughly an hour if I maintained speed and didn't stop for anything. I'd done this route hundreds of times, knew every mile marker, every exit, every place where the shoulder widened enough to pull over safely. Knew which bridges had the worst ice in winter, which stretches caught the most wind, which spots had the weakest cell phone reception. The patrol car was a newer Ford Interceptor, less than a year old, with all the latest equipment. Computer terminal, upgraded radio system, better lights and sirens. But I still preferred my old Crown Victoria that had finally been retired after putting on over 200,000 miles. That car had personality, character. This new one felt sterile, efficient but soulless. Like everything else in modern law enforcement, it prioritized function over feel, data over intuition. The computer terminal was particularly annoying. It beeped and buzzed with every update, every notification, every piece of information that headquarters thought I needed to know. License plate readers, bolo alerts, weather warnings, administrative messages. The constant stream of digital noise was supposed to make us more efficient, more connected, more effective. But all it did was distract from the actual work of policing, which was watching and listening and understanding the rhythm of your territory. It was 11:47 p.m. when I passed mile marker 89 for the first time. I remember the exact time because I'd just checked my watch, calculating how many hours I had left before I could go home and pretend to sleep on the couch while Sarah pretended to sleep upstairs. The dashboard clock had stopped working weeks ago, another thing I kept meaning to fix but never got around to. The list of things I kept meaning to fix seemed to grow longer every day, both mechanical and personal. Mile marker 89 was unremarkable. There was nothing there except empty highway stretching in both directions, fields of cotton stubble on either side, and a sky full of stars, the kind of emptiness that West Texas specializes in, the kind that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I'd passed this marker thousands of times over the years, never giving it a second thought. It was just another number on a long stretch of highway, no different from 88 or 90, no more significant than any other arbitrary point along the road. But that night, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I noticed it. Really noticed it. The way the moonlight hit the reflective surface of the marker, the way the shoulder seemed slightly wider there, like the highway department had planned for something that never materialized. The way the air felt different, heavier somehow as I passed, like the atmosphere itself was denser at that particular spot, like something about the location created a subtle pressure that you could feel if you were paying attention. I'd felt that kind of thing before in other places. Certain houses where domestic violence calls always turned ugly. Certain intersections where accidents happened with disturbing frequency. Certain stretches of road where drivers reported feeling uneasy, where they'd speed up without really knowing why. My father had called them bad spots, places where something about the geography or history or pure random chance created a focal point for trouble. But I'd never felt anything about mile marker 89 before. It had always been just another marker, just another point along my patrol route. Until tonight. The radio had been quiet all night. Angela Martinez, my night dispatcher, had checked in at the start of my shift and then gone silent. That wasn't unusual. Most nights passed without a single call, without a single incident requiring response. In a county where everyone knew everyone else, where most conflicts got resolved over a cup of coffee rather than through law enforcement, there simply wasn't much crime. What crime we did have was usually related to drugs, methamphetamine mostly, coming up from Mexico through larger cities and filtering out to rural areas where the market was small but consistent. Angela was good at her job, maybe the best dispatcher I'd worked with in my entire career. She had an instinct for reading situations over the radio, for knowing when a routine call might turn dangerous, for sensing when a deputy needed backup, even if they hadn't explicitly requested it. She was in her late 20s, sharp as a tack, planning to go to law school in a couple of years. I'd written her a recommendation letter, told her she'd make a hell of a lawyer. She had that combination of intelligence and empathy that was rare in any profession, but especially in law enforcement. Her father had been a deputy, too, had worked with my father back in the 80s. He'd been killed in the line of duty when Angela was just a kid, shot during a traffic stop that had gone bad. She barely remembered him, had only vague memories of a man in uniform who'd lift her up and let her play with his badge. But she'd followed in his footsteps anyway, had dedicated her life to the same job that had taken his. There was something both admirable and tragic about that. I continued north, checking my speed, watching for any vehicles that might need assistance. The radio was quiet except for occasional chatter from other counties. Randall County's frequency stayed silent. It was going to be one of those nights where nothing happened, where the hours crawled by in slow motion, where the only challenge was staying awake. The heater in the patrol car was running, fighting against the October cold that seeped in through the windows and doors. The temperature outside was probably in the low 40s, cold enough to be uncomfortable, but not cold enough to be dangerous. This was the time of year when West Texas couldn't make up its mind about the weather. Some days would hit 80 degrees, warm enough for short sleeves. Other days would barely break 50, with winds that cut right through your jacket. Tonight was one of the cold ones, with a north wind that made the temperature feel even lower than it was. The wind in West Texas is a constant presence, a character in its own right. It shapes the landscape, bends the trees, wears away the earth. It howls and moans and whispers, carrying with it the smell of dust and distance. Some people can't stand it, that relentless wind that never really stops. They move away, find calmer places where the air is still and the sky doesn't seem quite so vast. But I'd grown up with it, had learned to read its moods and meanings. A north wind in October meant cold weather coming. A south wind in spring meant storms. An east wind, any time of year, meant trouble. My father had taught me that, though he'd never been able to explain why. I'd forgotten my thermos of coffee at home, another consequence of leaving the house in a hurry to avoid having to make small talk with Sarah. So I was running on gas station coffee from a travel stop in Lubbock, the kind that tasted like hot water filtered through burnt rubber. But it had caffeine, and that was what mattered. The cup sat in the holder beside me, still half full, still lukewarm. I'd drink it eventually, probably around 3 a.m. when the exhaustion really started to set in. I reached the junction with Highway 60 at 12:13 a.m., turned around in the wide turnaround area the state had built there, and headed south. This was the pattern of my patrol: north to the junction, south to the county line, repeat until dawn. Simple, predictable, mind-numbing. The kind of work that gave you too much time to think, too much time to dwell on all the things in your life that weren't working out the way you'd planned. I thought about Emily, wondering how she was doing at UT Austin. She was studying psychology, wanted to be a therapist. Maybe that's why she'd noticed the problems between Sarah and me. She was training to see those things, to read the subtle signs of relationships falling apart. I'd talked to her on the phone a few days earlier, and she'd sounded happy, excited about her classes and her friends. She had a boyfriend now, some kid named Marcus who was studying engineering. I hadn't met him yet, wasn't sure when I would. Emily came home for holidays, but those visits were getting shorter, less frequent. She was building her own life now, and Sarah and I were becoming people she visited rather than people she lived with. That's the way it should be, I told myself. Kids grow up, move on, create their own families. But it still hurt, knowing that the little girl who used to wait by the door for me to come home from work was now a young woman with her own apartment and her own life and her own problems that didn't include me. I remembered teaching her to drive on these same roads. She'd been 15, terrified and excited in equal measure. We'd started in empty parking lots, progressing to quiet residential streets, and finally to the highway. She'd been a natural, had good instincts and reflexes. Sarah had worried every time we went out, convinced Emily would crash or panic or make some fatal mistake. But I'd known she'd be fine. She had that combination of confidence and caution that made for good drivers. The last time we'd gone driving together, right before she left for college, she'd asked me if I was happy. The question had come out of nowhere, while we were cruising down Highway 60 at sunset. The sky painted in oranges and reds. I'd been so surprised I hadn't answered right away, and she'd said, "Dad, you don't have to lie to me, I can see it. You and Mom. Something's wrong, and it's been wrong for a while." I'd tried to reassure her, to tell her that all marriages go through rough patches, that Sarah and I would work it out. But Emily had just looked at me with those perceptive eyes and said, "I hope so, because I don't want you to end up alone." At the time, I'd brushed it off, but her words had stayed with me, echoing in my head during these long, lonely nights. "I don't want you to end up alone," as if she could see the trajectory I was on, the path I was following toward isolation and emptiness. At 12:34 a.m., I passed mile marker 89 again, heading south this time. And that's when I saw it. There was a car pulled over on the shoulder, right at mile marker 89. Hazard lights blinking in that distinctive rhythm. I hadn't seen it on my northbound pass 21 minutes earlier. But there it was, clear as day in my headlights. A dark-colored sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, with someone sitting in the driver's seat. The figure was motionless, just sitting there with hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. My first thought was mechanical trouble. Maybe they'd overheated, or had a flat tire, or run out of gas. Common enough problems on these long stretches of highway, especially late at night when gas stations were closed and help was far away. My second thought was medical emergency. Maybe the driver had pulled over because they felt sick, had a heart attack or a stroke or some other sudden crisis. Either way, this was why I was out here. This was the job. Check on people, help when needed, make sure everyone made it home safely. I pulled over behind the vehicle and called it in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1. I'm 1097 at I-27, mile marker 89 southbound. Vehicle on shoulder with occupant inside." "Copy that, Unit 1, came the voice of my night dispatcher, Angela Martinez. She was young, only been with the department for 8 months, but she was good at her job. Professional, calm, never rattled. She had a way of speaking that was both efficient and reassuring, the kind of voice you wanted to hear in an emergency. "Proceed with caution." 10-4. I approached the vehicle, flashlight in hand, following the procedure I'd done thousands of times. Come up on the driver's side, stay back from the door, be ready for anything. Keep your offhand near your weapon, but don't draw unless the situation warrants it. Announce yourself clearly. Give the driver every opportunity to comply before escalating. The night was quiet, except for the wind and the distant hum of my patrol car's engine. No other traffic, no sounds from the vehicle I was approaching. Just silence and darkness, and that feeling of isolation that comes from being the only two people on a stretch of highway that runs for miles in either direction. As I got closer, I could see the driver more clearly through the beam of my flashlight. Male, maybe in his 40s, wearing a business suit. Dark hair, clean-shaven, the kind of professional appearance that suggested a salesman or executive traveling between cities. He was staring straight ahead, hands on the wheel at the 10 and 2 position, not moving, not looking at me, not reacting to my presence, not even turning his head as my flashlight beam swept across his window. Something felt wrong. The way he was sitting, perfectly still, perfectly rigid. The way his eyes didn't blink or shift. The way his chest didn't move with breathing. I'd seen enough dead bodies in my career to recognize the stillness of death, but this was different. This was someone posed, positioned, arranged to look like they were driving even though they clearly weren't. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, that primal warning system that evolution had given us telling me something was off about this situation. I'd learned to trust that feeling over the years. It had saved my life more than once, that subtle sense that something wasn't right even when everything appeared normal. I tapped on the window with my flashlight. "Sheriff's Department, everything okay, sir?" No response. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. just kept staring straight ahead like I wasn't there, like he couldn't hear me or see me, or was so lost in whatever thought occupied his mind that the outside world had ceased to exist. I tried the door handle. Unlocked. I pulled it open carefully, my other hand resting on my service weapon, ready for the situation to turn dangerous. You never knew. Sometimes people who appeared docile were actually preparing to attack. Sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous. 26 years of experience had taught me to be ready for anything. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." That's when I saw his face clearly in the full beam of my flashlight. His eyes were wide open, but unfocused, pupils dilated and fixed. His skin was pale, almost waxy in appearance, with that particular color that only comes after blood has stopped circulating. There were livid marks on the side of his face that faced down, where gravity had pulled the blood to the lowest point. Livor mortis, the medical examiner called it. And there was something wrong with the way he was sitting. Too rigid, too still. Like a mannequin dressed up to look human, positioned carefully to create the illusion of life without actually having any. I reached in to check for a pulse, already knowing what I would find. His skin was cold. Not just cool from the night air, but genuinely cold. Body temperature cold. The kind of cold that only comes after the heart has stopped pumping warm blood through the veins. His neck was stiff with rigor mortis, and when I tried to move his arm, it resisted, locked in place by the chemical changes that occur in muscles after death. The rigor was well advanced, suggesting he'd been dead for several hours at minimum. He was dead. Had been dead for a while, based on the temperature and the advanced signs of rigor mortis setting into his jaw, neck, and limbs. But here he was, sitting in his car on the shoulder of I-27, looking for all the world like he'd just pulled over and would start driving again any moment. I stepped back and called it in, my voice and CSI steady despite the unease creeping through me. Finding a body wasn't unusual in this line of work, but something about this felt off. The way he was positioned, the fact that I hadn't seen the vehicle on my previous pass, the complete lack of any disturbance around the scene. Everything about it felt staged, arranged, like someone had set up a tableau for me to find. "Dispatch Unit 1, I've got a 10 to 54 at this location. Need medical examiner and backup." "Copy that, Unit 1. Medical examiner en route. ETA 45 minutes. Deputy Harris is 1076, ETA 20 minutes. 10-4. Victim appears to be a white male, approximately 40 years old, seated in driver's seat of the vehicle. Obvious signs of death, possibly several hours old. No visible trauma. Scene appears undisturbed. Copy all, Unit 1. Be advised, Weather Service is reporting temperature drop to below freezing within the next hour. Understood. I secured the scene and waited, walking a perimeter around the vehicle with my flashlight looking for anything unusual. The shoulder was clean. No skid marks, no debris, no sign of an accident or struggle. The vehicle itself appeared undamaged. Not a scratch on it, not a dent, nothing to suggest it had been involved in any kind of incident. The engine was off, keys in the ignition. The gas gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. Nothing that would explain why someone had pulled over here, in the middle of nowhere, and then died. The fields on either side of the highway stretched into darkness. Cotton plants long since harvested, leaving only stubble and bare earth. In the distance, I could see the lights of a farmhouse, maybe 2 miles away across the flat landscape, too far for anyone there to have seen anything, assuming anyone was even awake at this hour. Most farmers were in bed by 9, up before dawn to start work. The isolated lights looked lonely against the vast darkness, tiny points of human presence in an overwhelming emptiness. The dead man sat in his car, hands still on the wheel in that perfect 10-2 grip, eyes still staring at nothing through the windshield. I wondered what he'd been looking at in his final moments. What had he seen? The empty highway? The stars? Or something else, something I couldn't see? I checked his pockets for ID, careful not to disturb the body more than necessary, documenting everything with my body camera that was recording everything. Found a wallet with a driver's license. Robert Palmer, age 43, address in Amarillo. There were credit cards, a health insurance card, $47 in cash, and a photo of a woman and 2 young children, his family, presumably. Looking at that photo, at the smiling faces frozen in happier times, made my chest tighten. This man had people who loved him, who were waiting for him to come home, who didn't know yet that he never would. There was a wedding ring on his left hand, worn smooth from years of wear, the gold dimmed by daily contact. In the passenger seat was a briefcase, the expensive leather kind that businessmen carried. I checked it carefully, using a pen to open it rather than my bare hands to preserve any potential evidence. Sales brochures for agricultural equipment, a laptop computer, a phone charger, some business cards that identified him as a regional sales manager for a company based in Dallas. Everything suggested a businessman who'd pulled over for some reason and then died. Heart attack, maybe. Stroke. Some medical emergency that had come without warning. His cell phone was still in the cup holder, battery dead. When I checked the glove compartment, I found the registration and insurance card, both current and properly filed. A packet of tissues, some hand sanitizer, a pair of sunglasses. Everything neat and organized, the car of someone who took care of their belongings, who maintained order in their life. That made his death seem even more tragic somehow. All that organization, all that care, rendered meaningless by whatever had stopped his heart. But why here? Why at mile marker 89? Why pull over in the middle of an empty stretch of highway instead of continuing to the next town, the next gas station, the next place where help might be available? Amarillo was only about 20 miles north. Even if he'd been feeling ill, he could have made it to a hospital, could have called 911, could have done something other than pulling over on a dark highway to die alone. And why hadn't I seen the vehicle on my northbound pass just 21 minutes earlier? I'd been paying attention, had been watching the road carefully. I always did. There's no way I could have missed a car with its hazards on, sitting right at mile marker 89. No way. Unless it hadn't been there. Unless it had appeared in the 21 minutes between my northbound pass and my southbound return. But that didn't make sense either. If Robert Palmer had pulled over after I'd passed going north, he would have been sitting here for at least that long. But the engine was barely warm. When I'd touched the hood, it had felt like the car had only been shut off for a few minutes, not over 20. Nothing about this added up. I walked back to my patrol car and sat inside, filling out the preliminary paperwork while I waited for backup. The form was routine: location, time, description of the scene, initial observations. But as I wrote, I kept looking up at the Honda, at Robert Palmer's body still visible in the beam of my spotlight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong about this situation. Not just sad or tragic or unfortunate, but wrong in a deeper way that I couldn't quite articulate. The wind had picked up, rocking my patrol car slightly, carrying with it that smell of dust and distance that was so characteristic of West Texas. The temperature display showed 38 degrees and dropping. In another hour, it would be below freezing. I turned up the heat and poured the last of my terrible gas station coffee into the lid of the thermos, drinking it despite the fact that it was now cold and even more unpleasant than it had been hot. Deputy Harris arrived first, a young officer named Travis who'd been with the department for 3 years. Good kid, eager to learn. Maybe a little too eager sometimes. He still had that enthusiasm that comes from being new to the job before the daily grind wears you down, and you realize that most of what you do is paperwork and waiting. He still believed he could make a difference. Still saw the job as a calling rather than just a paycheck. I hoped he'd keep that idealism, but experience had taught me that most officers lost it within the first 5 years. He pulled up behind my cruiser, killed his lights except for his flashlight bar, and walked over. The lights created strange shadows across the scene, making everything look even more surreal than it already did. "What have we got, Sheriff?" "DOA, looks like natural causes. We'll know more when the ME gets here." We stood there, 2 officers on an empty highway in the middle of the night, waiting for the medical examiner. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of dust and dried cotton from the fields. The temperature was dropping fast, just like Angela had warned. I could see our breath now when we spoke, visible clouds in the beam of the flashlights. Travis walked around the vehicle, examining it with his flashlight, learning the scene the way I'd taught him. He was methodical, thorough, taking his time to observe everything before drawing conclusions. No signs of trauma, no damage to the vehicle. Looks like he just pulled over and expired. Poor bastard. That's what I'm thinking. But something feels wrong about it. Wrong how? I couldn't articulate it. Just a feeling, an instinct developed over decades of law enforcement. Something about the scene didn't fit. Too neat, too clean, too perfect in its simplicity. And that nagging question that I couldn't let go of, why hadn't I seen this vehicle on my previous pass? "Travis, when you drove up here from town, did you see this vehicle on the shoulder? Did you pass it before you reached me?" He thought for a moment, his brow furrowing. "I don't think so. I was watching the road like always, looking for any vehicles that might need assistance. I would have noticed a car with its hazards on. Why? Are you thinking it wasn't here when you passed earlier?" "I know it wasn't here. I passed this exact spot at 11:47, not even an hour ago. This car wasn't here then. I'm absolutely certain of it. Maybe he just pulled over after that. Maybe you missed him by a few minutes. Maybe. But Angela said you were about 20 minutes out when I called this in at 12:36. That means you left the station around 12:15 or so. If this guy pulled over after I passed at 11:47, he would have been sitting here for at least half an hour before I found him. But the engine's barely warm. I touched the hood when I first approached. It felt like it had only been shut off for a few minutes, not over half an hour." Travis looked at the Honda, then back at me, a slight frown creasing his young face. "So what are you thinking, Sheriff?" "I don't know. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there, making connections that don't exist. But this doesn't feel right. The timeline doesn't work. The temperature of the engine doesn't match how long the body's been dead. None of it adds up." "You think there's something suspicious about it? Like maybe someone else was involved?" "I don't know what I think. But I want the ME to take a very close look at this body and this scene. I want photographs of everything, documentation of everything. I want to make sure we're not missing something important." The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Lowe, arrived at 1:32 a.m. in her county vehicle, a white SUV with official markings and a light bar on top. She was in her 60s, had been doing this job for longer than I'd been sheriff. She'd seen everything, and nothing fazed her anymore. She'd examined bodies in every condition, in every location, under every circumstance imaginable. If something bothered her, it was serious. If she couldn't explain something, it was genuinely inexplicable. We'd worked together on dozens of cases over the years. She'd taught me how to read a death scene, how to look for the subtle signs that could tell you what had really happened in someone's final moments. She was patient and thorough and absolutely unshakable in her professional demeanor. I'd never seen her lose her composure, Never seen her react with anything other than clinical detachment to even the most horrific scenes. She examined the body while Travis and I watched, taking notes on a clipboard, photographing the scene with a professional camera that had a flash bright enough to light up the entire area. The sudden bursts of light created strange shadows, making the scene look even more surreal. Each flash seemed to freeze time for a moment, capturing Robert Palmer in his eternal stillness from every angle. She took temperature readings, checked the rigor mortis in various muscle groups, examined the lividity patterns, looked at the eyes and fingernails and all the other subtle indicators that could help establish time of death. She worked in silence, her movements efficient and practiced, the routine of decades creating a rhythm that was almost meditative to watch. After about 10 minutes of examination, she stood up and pulled off her latex gloves with a snap that echoed in the quiet night. "Massive coronary event," she said, her voice clinical and detached as always. "Probably dropped dead instantly. No signs of foul play, no indication of any other contributing factors. Just bad luck and bad genetics. Poor bastard probably didn't even know what hit him. 1 second he's driving along thinking about whatever businessmen think about, and the next second his heart just stops. At least it was quick." "Time of death?" She checked her notes, consulted her watch, did some mental calculations. She'd been doing this long enough that she could estimate time of death with remarkable accuracy just from physical signs. Based on lividity and rigor, body temperature and ambient conditions, I'd say approximately 4 to 6 hours ago. Maybe around 7 or 8 p.m. Could be a little earlier, could be a little later. These calculations aren't exact, especially with the temperature dropping like it is tonight. Cold weather slows decomposition, affects body temperature readings, makes the timeline a bit trickier to pin down. I looked at my watch. It was now 1:47 a.m. So he's been sitting here for 6 hours, minimum, maybe longer? Looks that way. Give or take an hour or so. Hard to be more precise than that without getting him back to the lab and doing a full autopsy. I passed this exact spot at 11:26 p.m. heading north, not even 2.5 hours ago. There was no vehicle here then. I'm certain of it. Absolutely certain. Dr. Lowe looked at me, then at the car, then back at me. Her expression didn't change. It never did. But I could see the question in her eyes, the slight narrowing that suggested she was processing information that didn't quite fit her expectations. "Well, Sheriff, I can only tell you when he died. I can't tell you when his car arrived at this location. That's your department, not mine. But I will say this. The body shows no signs of having been moved post-mortem. He died in that driver's seat, in that exact position, and he hasn't been disturbed since. So, unless someone towed the entire car here with him still in it, which seems unlikely, he drove here himself before he died. But he's been dead since around 7 or 8 p.m. That's 6 or 7 hours ago. So where has this car been for the last 6 hours? Because it wasn't here at 11:26. I have no idea, Sheriff. That's a question for someone other than a medical examiner. We arranged for the body to be transported to the morgue in Amarillo. The car would be towed to our impound lot and held until we could contact the next of kin. Standard procedure for a death investigation, even one that appeared natural. We'd need to verify his identity, contact his family in the worst phone call anyone ever has to make, determine if there were any suspicious circumstances that weren't immediately apparent. Sometimes, what looked like natural death turned out to be something else entirely. Poison, suffocation, any number of ways to kill someone that didn't leave obvious marks. By 2:15 a.m., the scene was clear. Deputy Harris headed back to his patrol route in the eastern part of the county, and I continued mine. The ambulance had taken Robert Palmer's body away, and Pete Franklin's tow truck had loaded up the Honda and was heading back to town. The shoulder where the car had been was empty now, just cold asphalt and frost-covered grass, no indication that anything unusual had happened there. I drove south to the county line, turned around, headed north again. The night had grown colder, the temperature dropping into the low 30s now. Frost was forming thick on the grass in the fields, making everything sparkle in my headlights like scattered diamonds. The stars overhead were brilliant. That particular clarity you only get in cold weather when the atmosphere is clean and dry and absolutely still. At 2:47 a.m., I passed mile marker 89 heading north. The car was back. Same dark sedan. Same position on the shoulder. Same hazard lights blinking in that hypnotic, mesmerizing rhythm. And sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel in that perfect 10-2 position, staring straight ahead with dead eyes, was Robert Palmer. The impossible had become real. The light vanished. The highway was empty. Just asphalt and painted lines and mile marker 89 standing silent in the pre-dawn darkness. I stood there for a long time, sage smoke still drifting around me in the cold morning air, feeling the weight of what had just happened settling into my bones like a truth I'd carry forever. The weight wasn't heavy exactly. It was more like substance, like I'd gained something solid and real that had been missing before. I'd opened a door that had been closed for decades, maybe centuries. I'd released thousands of trapped souls, helped them complete a journey that had been interrupted by our modern world, by our highways, and our certainty that we understood how reality worked, by our assumption that the dead stayed dead and the living stayed living, and there was a clear, bright line between the two states. We'd been wrong about that. So, fundamentally, profoundly wrong that our error had created a prison for souls, a trap that held them in a state between existence and non-existence, unable to move forward into whatever came next, unable to return to the lives they'd left, caught in an eternal moment of transition that should have lasted seconds, but had stretched into years and decades and lifetimes. How many souls had been trapped there? How many people had died on or near this highway over the decades since it was built, their final journeys interrupted by the concrete and asphalt we'd laid over sacred ground? The thought was staggering, overwhelming, and yet here I stood, a small-town sheriff with no special training or knowledge, having somehow stumbled into the solution. Or maybe I hadn't stumbled at all. Maybe I'd been guided, chosen, prepared in ways I didn't understand to be in this exact place at this exact time to do this exact thing. The cornmeal circle I'd made was still visible on the asphalt, the individual grains catching the first hint of dawn light, glowing faintly like scattered stars. But as I watched, the circle began to fade, the grains disappearing one by one as if they were being absorbed into the road itself. It happened slowly, methodically, each grain winking out of existence in a pattern that almost seemed deliberate. Like the ritual, improvised and probably wrong in 1,000 ways, had somehow been right enough to matter, and now that its purpose was fulfilled, the physical evidence was being erased. Within 5 minutes, every grain was gone. The asphalt was clean, unmarked, showing no sign that anything unusual had happened there. But I knew. I'd witnessed it. I'd been part of it. And that knowledge would stay with me forever. I walked back to my patrol car slowly, my legs feeling weak not from physical exhaustion but from the sheer emotional and spiritual weight of what I'd experienced. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that went beyond anything I'd felt before. But there was also peace, a profound sense of rightness, of completion, of having fulfilled a purpose I hadn't known I had. The sage bundle had burned down to nothing but a small pile of ash in my hand. I scattered it on the shoulder, letting the wind take it away, carrying it across the fields and into the growing light of dawn. The tobacco I'd used was gone too, absorbed into the earth. The ceremony had consumed itself. leaving no trace except in my memory and in whatever spiritual records such things were kept in. As I got into the patrol car and started driving back toward town, the sun was just beginning to rise over the eastern horizon. The sky transformed from black to deep blue to purple to pink to gold, the colors bleeding into each other in that spectacular way that sunrises have. The world looked different now, transformed not just by light, but by what I'd experienced. Cleaner, somehow, lighter. Like a weight had been lifted not just from me, but from the landscape itself, from the very air and earth and sky. Or maybe I was just exhausted and seeing things that weren't there. Maybe the whole experience had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination, a breakdown brought on by too many years of service and too many nights alone on empty highways thinking about everything I'd lost and everything that was broken in my life. Maybe there was a rational explanation for everything that had happened, and I'd just been too tired to see it. But I didn't believe that. Couldn't believe it. I'd felt the presence of those souls, as real and solid as anything I'd ever experienced. Had seen them pass through the threshold with my own eyes. Had witnessed something that transcended the physical world and touched something deeper, something eternal. That wasn't hallucination. That was truth. When I got home, I found Sarah awake and worried, sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee and her bathrobe wrapped tight against the morning chill. The house was quiet, filled with that particular quality of silence that comes just before sunrise. She'd been crying. I could see the tracks on her face, the redness around her eyes, the wadded tissues on the table in front of her. When she saw me walk through the door, she stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Tom, where were you? I've been trying to call you for hours. Your phone kept going straight to voicemail, and when I called the station, Angela said you were out on patrol, but she hadn't heard from you in over an hour. I was about to call Harris and have him go looking for you. I thought, God, Tom, I thought something terrible had happened to you." Her voice broke on the last words, and I could see genuine fear in her eyes. Fear for me. Fear of losing me. And I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity that despite everything that had been broken between us, despite all the distance and silence and separate bedrooms, she still loved me, still cared what happened to me, still wanted me to come home safe. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. I should have checked in. I should have let you know where I was. I was at mile marker 89, and I lost track of time. I was dealing with something that needed to be finished. Mile marker 89? She came around the table, stood in front of me, her hands hovering near my face like she wanted to touch me, but wasn't sure if she should. "Tom, you've been obsessed with that place for days, ever since that dead man in the car. What's happening to you? What's happening to us? I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know how to stop it." I sat down at the table, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. Every muscle ached, every joint felt stiff, and my head was pounding with a headache that felt like someone was driving nails through my skull. Something was wrong there. Something I had to fix. Something that's been wrong for a long time, maybe decades. But it's done now. It's over. I think maybe I can finally start to let go of some things. Start to move forward instead of just existing. She sat down across from me, reached across the table and took my hands. Her touch was warm, real, anchoring me to the present moment, and to this life, and to this woman who'd stood by me for 32 years, even when I'd given her every reason to leave. "Tom, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I can see that something's changed. You look different. Not just tired, but different, like you've been somewhere far away and only just came back." So I told her everything. I told her about the impossible car at mile marker 89, about Robert Palmer sitting dead behind the wheel in a vehicle that existed in two places at once, about the accumulation of bodies over the following nights, dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of dead people standing on the highway watching me pass, about the research I'd done into the history of the location, the sacred ground of the Comanche, the ground of many returns where the dead would come back for one final visit before moving on to the afterlife. I told her about the ceremony I'd performed with sage and cornmeal and tobacco and prayers I'd improvised because I didn't know the right words or the right rituals, but I knew I had to do something. About the threshold opening, about seeing clearly into another world or another dimension, or whatever you want to call the place where souls go when they leave this one. About the thousands of trapped souls finally being released, finally able to complete their interrupted journeys. I told her about the dead version of myself that had been standing with them, the future I'd avoided by choosing to open the threshold and help them pass through, rather than trying to trap them or control them or send them back to wherever they'd been imprisoned. About the note in my own handwriting that had warned me, don't let them out. Not out into our world, but out through the threshold to whatever came next. I told her about the relief I'd felt watching them go, the sense of rightness and completion that had settled over everything when the last soul passed through and the light finally closed and the threshold sealed itself behind them. About how the cornmeal circle had faded away like it had never been there, like the ceremony had consumed itself in the doing of it. She listened without interrupting, her hands still holding mine, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief to something I couldn't quite read. Not skepticism exactly, but a kind of suspended judgment, like she was trying to decide what to believe. When I finished, we sat in silence for a long time. The morning sun streaming through the kitchen window, painting everything in warm golden light that felt almost sacred in its ordinary beauty. "Do you believe me?" I finally asked, not sure what answer I wanted to hear. "I don't know what to believe," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Part of me thinks you've been under too much stress, working too many nights, dealing with too many things alone. Part of me thinks maybe you had some kind of breakdown out there, that your mind created this elaborate story to make sense of something you saw that you couldn't explain. But I believe that you believe it, and I believe that something happened out there, something that's affected you deeply, changed you in ways I can see even if I don't fully understand them. Whether it was what you think it was, some kind of supernatural experience with trapped souls and thresholds between worlds, or whether it was something else, some kind of psychological crisis that manifested as visions. I don't know. I honestly don't know. You think I'm crazy. No, she said firmly. I don't think you're crazy. I think you're exhausted and stressed, and you've been caring too much for too long. I think you've been trying to be everything to everyone. A good sheriff, a good husband, a good father. And you've been doing it all alone, without asking for help, without admitting that you were struggling. And I think maybe that pressure finally broke something inside you, and what you experienced at mile marker 89 was your mind's way of processing that break. That's a very rational explanation. I'm a rational person, Tom. I deal in facts and evidence and things I can see and touch and understand. But I also know that you're not a liar, and you're not prone to flights of fancy. And in 32 years of marriage, I've never known you to make up stories or exaggerate or claim to have experienced something you didn't. So, if you say you saw thousands of dead people standing on a highway and helped them pass through a threshold to the afterlife, then I believe that's what you experienced, even if I can't explain how or why or whether it was real in any objective sense. She squeezed my hands, her grip firm and warm. But here's what I do know for sure. Whatever happened out there, you seem different now. Lighter, somehow. Like you've let go of something you've been carrying, some burden that was weighing you down. And if that's what you needed, if you needed to perform some kind of ritual and experience something profound and unexplainable to find a way forward, then I'm glad it happened. I'm glad you're back, I'm glad you're safe, and I'm glad you seem more like yourself than you have in years. We sat there together, not talking, just being present with each other in a way we hadn't been in months. Her hands in mine, the sun warming the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling as it started a fresh pot. And slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust each other again after a long separation, we started to rebuild what had been breaking between us for so long. It wasn't instant, it wasn't magic, but it was real, and it was a beginning. Continuing through the extensive aftermath, Tom's return to work, the conversations with Bradley and Harris, the investigation findings, and building toward the deeply reflective ending that explores themes of duty, death, meaning, and the thin places between worlds, all while adding the full 10,000 additional characters requested. I returned to work a week later, after taking some personal time that Sheriff Bradley had insisted on. The break had been good for me, good for Sarah and me, good for starting to heal some of the wounds that had been festering for years. We'd talked more in that week than we had in the previous 6 months, really talked about our fears and our regrets and our hopes for what might come next. Went for walks together through the neighborhoods we used to walk when Emily was young. Made dinner together, rediscovering the small rituals of partnership that we'd abandoned somewhere along the way. Started remembering why we'd fallen in love in the first place, what we'd seen in each other all those years ago that had made us want to build a life together. It wasn't perfect, old hurts don't heal that quickly, and trust that's been eroded takes time to rebuild. But it was progress. It was hope. It was a path forward instead of the slow decline we'd been on. Sheriff Bradley was skeptical when I returned, but I could see the relief in his eyes. He told me I looked better, seemed more centered, less haunted by whatever had been eating at me. We sat in his office and went over what had happened, though I was careful about how much I told him. I explained about the vehicle appearing and disappearing, about the pattern I'd observed, about the research I'd done into the history of the location. But I left out the parts about the ceremony and the threshold and the thousands of souls passing through to the afterlife. Some things are too strange to put in an official report. Bradley had closed I-27 at mile marker 89 for 3 days after my initial reports, had teams check the roadway and the shoulder, looking for any explanation for what I'd experienced. The highway department had surveyed the pavement, looking for structural issues or unusual magnetic fields or anything that might explain vehicles appearing and disappearing. The county had brought in engineers to check the bridges and overpasses nearby, making sure there were no hazards that might cause drivers to pull over suddenly. They found nothing unusual, just a normal stretch of highway, no different from any other. The pavement was standard asphalt over standard gravel and soil. The grade was gentle, the visibility was good, the shoulder was wide enough to pull over safely. No anomalies in the electromagnetic readings, no unusual seismic activity, no underground caverns or water sources that might affect the stability of the road. No evidence of anything strange or supernatural, or even particularly noteworthy. Just regular West Texas highway running through regular West Texas countryside. The engineer's report concluded that there was no structural or environmental reason for the incidents I'd reported. The psychologist that Bradley had required me to see as a condition of returning to work had concluded that I'd been under severe stress and had likely experienced a series of hallucinations brought on by exhaustion, emotional turmoil, and the cumulative effects of too many years in a high-stress profession. The official departmental position was that I'd had a breakdown, a temporary crisis brought on by personal and professional pressures, but that with proper rest and support I'd made a full recovery. I didn't argue with any of it. Let them believe what they needed to believe. Let the official record show whatever made everyone comfortable. The truth of what had happened at mile marker 89 was mine to carry, and I didn't need anyone else to validate it or believe it or understand it. Deputy Harris reported that the incidents had completely stopped after the night I'd performed the ceremony. No more impossible vehicles appearing at mile marker 89. No more dead people standing on the shoulder. No more calls from confused motorists reporting strange sights or sounds along that stretch of highway. The road was just a road again, and traffic passed through without incident, without even noticing that anything had ever been different there. Pete Franklin confirmed that Robert Palmer's Honda Accord had stayed in the impound lot where it belonged, existing in only one place at one time like any normal vehicle should. No mysterious appearances elsewhere. No duplication. No violations of the laws of physics. Just one car, properly stored, eventually released to Palmer's family after the death investigation was closed. Robert Palmer's autopsy confirmed what Dr. Lowe had suspected. Massive myocardial infarction. Death within seconds. No contributing factors or suspicious circumstances. His widow came from Amarillo to claim his body and his belongings. I met with her at the station, gave her his wallet and briefcase and the other personal effects we'd recovered from the vehicle. She was devastated, confused, still trying to understand how her husband had simply driven away one morning for a routine sales trip and never come home. She kept asking me if he'd suffered, if he'd been in pain, if there was anything that could have been done to save him. I gave her the answers I thought would bring comfort, that it had been quick, that he probably hadn't felt anything, that sometimes these things just happen and there's nothing anyone could have done. I didn't tell her about the impossible things I'd witnessed, about her husband's spirit being trapped at mile marker 89 for days, or weeks, or however long it had really been. Some truths would only cause pain without providing understanding or comfort. But I did tell her this. I believe your husband is at peace now. I believe he's where he's supposed to be, and he's not suffering or in pain or lost. He's completed his journey, and he's home, wherever that is. She looked at me strangely when I said it, like she couldn't quite understand what I meant, but could sense that I was trying to tell her something important. Then she thanked me, gathered her husband's belongings, and left. I never saw her again. The roadblocks came down on the fourth day. Traffic resumed its normal flow along I-27, trucks and cars and motorcycles passing through mile marker 89 without incident. The highway department declared the road safe, the engineers certified it as structurally sound, and life went back to normal for everyone except me. Because I knew. I carried the knowledge of what had really happened there, what had been trapped at that location for decades, what I'd been chosen or selected or just happened to stumble into the position to help resolve. And that knowledge changed everything about how I saw the world and my place in it. But sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling that stretch of I-27, I slow down as I pass mile marker 89. Not because I expect to see anything. I don't. The threshold is closed. The souls have passed through. The trap that existed there for so long has been permanently dissolved. But I slow down anyway, out of respect, out of remembrance, out of the need to honor what happened there. And sometimes, just for a moment, I think I see something. A flicker of light at the edge of my vision, like the threshold trying to crack open again for just a second. A shadow that might be a person standing on the shoulder, or might be nothing more than the play of my headlights across the landscape. An echo of what was once trapped there, a reminder of what lies just beyond the surface of the world we think we understand. But they're not trapped anymore. They've moved on. They've completed their journeys. And knowing that makes the darkness a little less dark, the emptiness a little less empty, the isolation of the night shift a little less lonely. And me? I'm still here, still working the night shift, though not as often now. I've been delegating more responsibilities to my deputies, letting them take their turns with the overnight patrols, spending more time at home with Sarah. We're learning how to be married again, how to be partners instead of just cohabitants, how to bridge the distance that had grown between us through years of neglect and miscommunication, and the slow erosion of intimacy that happens when you stop paying attention to each other. It's not perfect. Some wounds run deep, and trust that's been broken takes time and effort and patience to rebuild. But we're trying. We are both trying. And that effort, that mutual commitment to healing what was broken, means more than any grand gesture or dramatic reconciliation ever could. Emily came home for Thanksgiving, brought Marcus with her to meet us. He turned out to be a genuinely good kid, polite, smart, respectful, clearly devoted to my daughter. We took them out to dinner at the best restaurant in Amarillo, and for a few hours we were a family again, sharing a meal and stories and laughter around a table. Emily pulled me aside before they left and told me I seemed happier, more present, more like the father she remembered from her childhood. "Whatever you've been dealing with, Dad, it seems like you've found some kind of resolution," she said, hugging me tight. "I'm glad. I've been worried about you and Mom, but you both seem, I don't know, lighter somehow. Like you've let go of something heavy that you'd been carrying for too long." She was right. I was lighter. The burden of whatever had been accumulating at mile marker 89, the weight of all those trapped souls, the responsibility of being the one who had to witness and understand and ultimately resolve it. All of that was gone now. Lifted. Released. But more than that, I'd let go of other things too. The guilt about being a less than perfect husband. The shame about prioritizing the job over my family. The fear that I'd wasted my life on a career that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The worry that I'd end up alone, bitter, isolated, having pushed away everyone who'd ever cared about me. I'd learned something at mile marker 89, something that went beyond the supernatural and the impossible and the terrifying. I'd learned that sometimes the hardest thing isn't facing the darkness or the unknown, or the things that go bump in the night. Sometimes the hardest thing is facing yourself, acknowledging what you've been running from, admitting that you need help and healing and grace. The dead at mile marker 89 needed help finding their way home. But so did I. And in helping them, in opening that threshold and releasing them from their prison, I'd somehow released myself as well. Some roads are more than just roads. Some places are more than just places. Some moments are more than just moments. And sometimes the job of a sheriff isn't just to enforce the law, or protect the living, or maintain order in the visible world. Sometimes it's to help the dead find their way home. Sometimes it's to guard the thin places where worlds touch. Sometimes it's to stand watch over the boundaries that most people never see, the thresholds that exist in the spaces between light and dark, life and death here and there. I understand that now, in a way I never could have before. And I'll carry that understanding with me for however many nights I have left to patrol these empty highways, watching over the thin places, honoring the sacred ground, making sure that what needs to pass through can pass through safely, because that's what the badge means. Not just protection for the living, but guidance for the dead. Not just enforcing human laws, but respecting the deeper laws that govern the transitions between states of being. Not just maintaining order in the world we can see, but honoring the boundaries and thresholds and liminal spaces in the world we can only glimpse. And that's a duty that doesn't end with a shift change, or a retirement, or even death itself. It's eternal, forever, a responsibility that exists outside of time and transcends the ordinary boundaries of mortal existence. I drive through the darkness, and the darkness drives through me, And somewhere between the two, I find meaning, find purpose, find a reason to continue, to serve, to watch over the empty spaces and the lonely roads and the countless souls still making their journeys through the night. That's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Because in the end, we're all just travelers on these highways, moving from one place to another, from one state of being to another. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the boundaries are thin, when the veils between worlds grow transparent, we catch glimpses of what lies beyond. We see the truth that we're not alone, that we're never alone, that everything is connected in ways we can barely comprehend. The living and the dead, the visible and the invisible, the world we know and the worlds we can only imagine, all of it connected, all of it part of one continuous journey from beginning to end and back again. Mile marker 89 taught me that. The dead people standing on the shoulder taught me that. The threshold between worlds taught me that. And I'm grateful for the lesson, even if it came wrapped in terror and confusion and the slow dissolution of everything I thought I understood about reality. Because that's how the best lessons come. Not gently or easily or comfortably, but hard and strange and transformative. They break you open and remake you and leave you fundamentally changed in ways you couldn't have imagined before. I'm not the same man I was before that October night. I've been changed by what I witnessed, what I experienced, what I was called upon to do. And I'm grateful for that change, even though it came at a cost, even though it required me to face things I'd rather have avoided, even though it meant accepting truths about the nature of reality that most people never have to confront. So I drive, I watch, I wait. And when the next impossible thing appears on my highway, because there will be a next thing, I'm certain of that now, I'll be ready. Because that's what sheriffs do in West Texas. We keep watch over the empty spaces. We guard the lonely roads. We stand between what is and what might be, and we do our best to make sure that everyone, living or dead, or somewhere in between, finds their way home safely. It's not much, but it's everything, and it's enough, more than enough. It's purpose and meaning, and the reason I put on this badge every day and head out into the darkness to patrol these highways that stretch from horizon to horizon, under skies so vast they make you feel like nothing and everything all at once. This is my calling. This is my duty. This is what I was meant to do, even before I knew such duties existed. And I'll carry it with honor and humility and reverence for as long as I wear this badge, for as long as I patrol these roads, for as long as the night calls me out into the darkness to keep watch over the thin places and the lost souls, and the endless mystery of what it means to live and die and continue on in ways we can barely imagine. Mile marker 89 is quiet now. The souls are at rest. The threshold is closed. The trap is broken. But I still remember, still honor, still carry the knowledge of what happened there and what it meant, and what it taught me about the world and my place in it. And I'll remember forever, until my own journey ends, until I cross my own threshold, until I join that endless procession of souls moving from here to there, from now to then, from what was to what will be. And when that time comes, and it will come, I know that now, more certainly than I've ever known anything, I hope someone like me will be there. Someone to guide me through, someone to help me find my way home, someone who understands the thin places and the thresholds, and the sacred duty of watching over the boundaries between worlds, just like I helped them, just like I'll help anyone else who needs it. Because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. That's what we'll always do, in the darkness, on the highway, at the thin places where worlds touch and souls pass through and the impossible becomes possible. forever and ever, without end. Amen.